26th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. It's nice to see you all in person again. We have a number of items on new business today. We have a hard stop at 12, so we may not get to some of the items later on in the list. If that happens, we'll discuss what we will do with those ones at that time. So starting off with public comment, we start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item that is not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public here to speak? Nope. Seeing none, I will move on to the consent agenda. There is Z6221 is on the consent agenda, and as you can see, this one will appear on a future agenda. This is not the final disposition of this particular case. Without objection, Z6221 will be placed on a future agenda. Moving on to new business, item D.1, which is rezoning Z4521 on Navajo Drive. We'll start out with a staff presentation from Jason Harden.
Good morning, Jason Harden, Planning and Development. So this is the first time the Commission has seen this request. It is for multiple parcels along Navajo Drive. This is just north of the Beltline, and I'll talk about the location in a little bit more detail on the next slide, but it's a little bit more than 32 acres, currently a mix of zoning categories. There's CX, commercial mixed use, 7 stories, CX3, residential mixed use, 3 stories, and the request is to go to commercial mixed use, 20 stories with an urban limited frontage to give it some walkability and with some conditions that I will outline. So looking just briefly at overall zoning in the area, you can see a very large mixed use zoned area. To the north, you have some similar CX zoning, 20-story, 7-story heights. To the south, office mixed use, commercial mixed use. To the northwest, it's the purple is the PD, that is the North Hills East PD. Very similar zoning to what is requested on the site and what is adjacent to this site as well. There's also, I would note, a Special Highway Overlay District 1 and Special Highway Overlay District 2 that are on the site. They would be removed by the rezoning, but there's a condition that provides some language about trees and landscaping. This is an aerial view for those of you who this helps orient a little bit better. So the site is currently developed. There are apartments on the bulk of it, hotel, office buildings, and you can see similar uses in the general vicinity. To the north, that's labeled Midtown Exchange in that photo. That's pre-development. That is now under development, again, at similar zoning categories and uses. You can see the Beltline to the south, Wake Forest Road to the east, Duke Raleigh Hospital. So I'm sure everybody knows a already large and emerging center in the city of Raleigh. These are a couple of views from within the site. So on the left, both on Navajo. So the top left is looking east, kind of towards North Hills from Navajo Drive. It's looking towards Wake Forest Road. The second one is looking west, and that is near where Navajo terminates and connects with a very short section of Quail Hollow Drive. That is not the same Quail Hollow Drive, or at least it's not contiguous to the same Quail Hollow that runs north to Millbrook. It's separate. It won't connect in the future, but it is a short segment of it. And then on the right side of the screen, that's looking southwest near Wake Forest Road, and then looking west again from Navajo. So the conditions, a number of conditions prohibiting some of the uses otherwise allowed in CX. Talked about the SHOD, Special Highway Overlay District. This does have a condition that per approval from NCDOT, some trees and shrubs would be planted along the Beltline. Has a condition about the design and light emission from parking structures. It's similar to what we've seen in some other recent rezoning cases, and similar to what's being contemplated as an addition to the code for all development period. Would provide up to 2 bike share stations, 2 public art installations. There would be either one larger contiguous outdoor amenity area or 2 half that size. The applicant can speak to that. I think the intent is to provide more of a true, it would be private, but more of a central space rather than the residual spaces that amenity areas often amount to. There are some conditions to deal with housing and affordability. One is providing, unless a greater standard would apply from a resident's lease, at least 30 days notice for termination of a lease. And then lastly, a condition that requires any units beyond what would be our estimate of current entitlement, which is about 900 units. That's more than what exists on the site, but essentially what we've estimated could be developed under the current zoning. So anything beyond that 901 units, 10% of those new units would have to be affordable at 80% of the area median income for at least 10 years, or alternatively, at the city's option, a fee provided. So a comparison, and I think we touched on this, but a comparison of existing versus proposed. The mix of uses, 7 stories, 3 stories to 20 stories. The density was obviously increased. This would be able to house many more people than the current zoning does, would allow much more office space. The setbacks are built to a relatively similar, with the exception that the urban limited frontage is, that's something that policy desires in a place like this with this higher level of height and development. Want to see that be more walkable in order to ensure that not everyone feels forced to drive. So it calls for, among other things, a narrower build to, bring the buildings closer to the street. No parking in between the buildings and the street. You saw from some of the pictures, there's quite a lot of parking. Building the buildings closer to the street provides a safer, more comfortable space for pedestrians. So looking at transportation and energy analysis, this is thinking about carbon emissions per capita for people here versus elsewhere. So this is a place where the walk score is higher than the city's average. People living here are going to be more likely to walk, and that's likely going to increase pretty significantly as Midtown overall continues to develop, as there are city projects that improve walkability and connectivity, and as on the private side more housing and employment takes place. But even existing, it's higher than average, higher transit score than average. So again, the idea that people are more likely in this location than other locations in Raleigh to use modes other than driving and emit less carbon through transportation. Similar with affordability as well. It does add to the housing supply significantly. It does include some subsidized units, at least if that condition kicks in. Permits a variety of housing types, so all things being equal, new apartment units are much less expensive than new detached houses. Allows smaller units, and it's within walking distance of transit when thinking about housing and transportation costs at the same time, which we have to. That allows for a more car light or car free lifestyle. In terms of the future land use map, this burgundy color represents regional mixed use. Outside of downtown, that is the most dense or intense category in that future land use map. It translates into a 20-story height recommendation, and CX and 20 stories is consistent with that designation. Urban form, that relates to, again, the walkability and the form of the buildings, looking for a much more pedestrian-friendly realm in the city growth center. The urban limited frontage is fully consistent with that. There also is, you'll see the green line in the center on the Beltline, that's the Parkway corridor. So that looks to see something like the SHOD overlay or the condition that has been provided. A number of consistent policies, all that touch on the types of issues that we've talked about already. Future land use map, allowing more compact development, reducing vehicle miles traveled through mixed use and more intensive development in places like this, capitalizing on city investments in transit, housing variety, greenhouse gas reduction, allowing more housing choice, frontage consistency. And there is an area plan policy from the Midtown area plan that talks about affordability. The condition followed pretty precisely that area plan policy. So consistent with the future land use map, consistent with the urban form map, those policies, consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. There's one issue that we've noted with the applicant. There is as part of their TIA, a provision to connect Navajo Drive with Church at North Hill Street, and I can back up to that actually. Might be helpful. Well, it's a little bit unclear from these maps, and I apologize for that, but if you could follow the cursor, or at least locate Navajo Drive running through the center of the site. So again, it terminates at Quail Hollow, and that itself terminates before it reaches any other street. So as part of the Midtown Exchange project, Quail Hollow will connect north and then ultimately terminate at St. Albans Drive. And the city street plan calls for Navajo to continue to the west and connect with Church at North Hills, which is a street that's being built as part of the North Hills plan development. This provides a commitment to create that street connection, help establish a street grid in this area where it is relatively, as you can tell, fragmented. This is at present basically a very large cul-de-sac in a sense. So connectivity is essential in achieving a better transportation system that works for people walking, that distributes vehicle trips instead of funneling them all through only one or two intersections. So there's a commitment to provide that. Staff's belief is that that's extremely helpful, but that a specific zoning condition that talks about the timing after the X unit is developed on the site, something that provides a little bit more certainty about how and when that connection would be provided. So that's all I have. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. Harden. Next, we will hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Jennifer Ashton with Longleaf Law Partners. I'm here today on behalf of the property owners. And as Jason mentioned, we have 6 parcels that we're seeking to rezone to that CX20 urban limited frontage. I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about the Midtown area plan and then also the conditions that we're proposing. And hopefully if I have some time left, I'll save it for rebuttal. Okay, so the map that you have in front of you is taken from the comp plan. It is part of the Midtown Small Area Plan, and some things that I do want to highlight for you here. The Midtown plan has quite a few traffic improvements, not only for vehicles, but also multimodal options to assist with moving pedestrians and bicycles around Midtown more easily than it is today. The area in orange here is designated as the future Midtown Ring. It's supposed to be a pedestrian and bicycle friendly pathway to connect the majority or the major points of Midtown together. So just so you all are aware, some things that we are doing as part of our zoning conditions to assist with implementing this plan, we are providing 2 bike share stations as a zoning condition. Most likely one will be located closer to Wake Forest Road, and then the other will probably be closer to this Quail Hollow extension that Jason just talked about. Another thing to point out, Jason did mention that Navajo Drive is going to be realigned and then connected to the Church at North Hills East, which is the roadway that's coming from the west from the North Hills East PD. We are going to be realigning that roadway as part of our development. Staff did mention, and Jason just mentioned a few minutes ago, that there is a desire from staff to actually put a deadline on when that extension will happen. We have a little bit of concern with doing a specific deadline, just because we have no idea how this site is actually going to be phased, how it's going to be developed out. We do know that we're most likely going to have to do a mitigation plan with the Transportation and Engineering Department when we do come in for the site planning phase. And at that point in time during site plan, we will have a much better idea of what parts of the project are going to be phased at what time. So we could easily tie the extension to Navajo Road to a specific site plan during that mitigation plan site planning phase. Another issue with going ahead and in a zoning condition saying that Navajo Road will be extended by X date certain It's a little hard to see right here, but this is where the existing apartment complex is located. That is naturally occurring affordable housing today. We've heard numerous concerns from members of the community, especially the Midtown CAC, that they would like us to, if we can, keep those residents in their units for as long as possible as this site is being constructed. If we're forced to put a deadline on when this Navajo Road extension will happen, we may be forced to tear down those buildings before we're ready to put anything back in their place. So again, we would just ask the commission, in looking at the conditions that we're proposing today, just to allow us to do that Navajo extension timing at the site planning phase. We will have a much better idea at that point, like I said, of when the phasing of the project will happen, and hopefully we'll be able to keep those residents in their units for as long as possible. One last thing I wanted to mention about the small area plan is there will be this extension of Quail Hollow, and there is a proposed new overpass over I-440 to connect south of I-440. That will provide a great new north-south reliever road to hopefully alleviate some of the traffic issues that are on Six Forks and also on Wake Forest Road. We are not designing or constructing that overpass as part of our rezoning case. However, just so you're aware, our project is critical to that bridge overpass happening at some point in the future, because we are going to be dedicating quite a bit of land to that north landing spot near our property. So just quickly about some of our zoning conditions. Jason went through these. I don't want to repeat a whole lot of what he said. We do have an affordable housing requirement that does meet the recommendations of the small area plan. So as Jason mentioned, anything over our current entitlement, 10% of those units will be dedicated as affordable for 10 years at that 80% AMI. Also, we are we're looking at options again to ensure and help the residents that are currently at that apartment complex towards the west of our site. One thing that we have added in here, just to show that we have a commitment not to kick these residents out when they're not able to find alternative housing. The thought is existing leases will end at a certain point in time based on their own terms. You know, if they're a year lease, they'll end at the end of the year. But we're hoping to, for the residents that want to stay, put them on like a month-to-month lease as we're getting closer to construction, again, to allow them to stay as long as possible. So we've added in here, if we are in that scenario where we're like in a month-to-month lease situation with a tenant, we would be required to provide at least a 30-day written notice of termination before they had to leave. This is a minimum. In all likelihood, we'll know way in advance of when construction on that site is supposed to start, and we'll definitely keep the residents up to date. But we wanted to make a public commitment that we're not going to be kicking anybody out if they don't have enough notice. Just so you know, on a month-to-month lease, notice requirements under North Carolina law, you only have to give a 7-day notice, which is an incredibly short period of time. So again, we're trying to go above and beyond that. We are offering parking deck screening conditions. As Jason mentioned, they are consistent with what you all have seen before for other more urban developments. We're also offering those 2 bike share stations to meet the goals of that Midtown ring and that small area plan. And we're also providing 2 public art installations along Navajo Drive to create kind of these public plaza feel areas, these pedestrian friendly areas. And then finally, we are offering a contiguous outdoor amenity area. A lot of times all these projects are required to provide a certain amount of outdoor amenity space, but sometimes they're throwaway spaces. They're not contiguous with each other. They may be located behind a building or in an area that's not really accessible to the residents. So we're making a commitment to congregate that outdoor amenity space. So we're creating more of like a plaza or a pocket park feel. But anyway, with that being said, staff has found us consistent with the future land use map and the comp plan overall. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, and if I could reserve the rest of my time for rebuttal. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public signed up to speak on this item? Okay. Please come forward. We'll set the timer. Yes, sir.
So if you will wait while I find the presentation.
Not a problem. And if there are other members of the public, you can just come down towards the front if you want to speak on this item or the next item. And please state your name and your address.
Hello. My name is Cynthia M. Curran, and I am here on behalf of Aaron's Creek Properties, which I own, and it's at Barrett Square Office Condominiums located at 4010 Barrett Drive, Suite 205, Raleigh. I am here to state an objection on approval of the Avondale petition until the city defines a route for the multimodal bridge. Ms. Ashton addressed the fact that the city plans to construct a bridge. It's going to be 64 feet wide. It's going to cross the Beltline from Navajo Drive to Barrett Drive. It will carry 2 lanes of traffic, 2 lanes of bicycle traffic, and 2 lanes of pedestrians, and the landing of the bridge will be on the north side of the Beltline that will be on the Avondale project. This is from the city of Raleigh. This is a concept of the bridge crossing the Beltline. As you can see, on the right-hand side, it's on the Avondale property. On the left-hand side, it is crossing into Barrett Square Office Condominiums, which are where our offices are. As currently designed, the 6-lane bridge will cut directly through and bisect the 2 phases of Barrett Square Office Condominiums, demolishing over half of the office condos, taking the parking lot, and possibly stranding other office units. Barrett Square 1 has a total of 40 office condo units, and Barrett Square 2 has 40 office condo units. These are the businesses, the Raleigh local businesses that are located in Barrett Square Phase 1. These are the businesses, the local Raleigh businesses that are in Barrett Square Phase 2. This is the bridge concept which I got from the city, and this concept bisects Phase 1 and 2 of Barrett Square office condos and requires condemnation of buildings and businesses on the Barrett Square side of the Beltline, and the proposed traffic pattern requires a 90-degree turn off of Barrett Drive onto the bridge. This I received from the city. This is the city's original 4 concepts for crossing the Beltline. The red concept is alternative C, which they have chosen as their best alternative, which goes directly through my building and the 4 units. It also, if you follow the line of the red from Avondale on the right, across the Beltline, through the red, through our buildings, and then where it turns black, it is also demolishing additional buildings all the way down to 6 Forks Road. The city failed to consider a 5th, more feasible option. The 5th option would be to extend Barrett Drive across a 4-acre tract just east of Barrett Square office condos. And that 4-acre tract, called the Stevens property, has no buildings, no improvements, so the city would not demolish any ongoing viable business. This was the map that I drew and presented to the City Council in December 2020 and proposed that they consider this Stevens property, which is outlined in red. It is just south of the Barrett Square office condominiums. It has never had anything built on it for 50 years, and there are no improvements on it. I drew this, suggested that if you see Quail Hollow on the right top, that is the extension that Ms. Dashin talked about that has to cross over to come down to Barrett Drive. I suggested it's a better alignment than what they're suggesting. It comes directly from Quail Hollow across the Stevens property and then comes down to Barrett. And it does not cross a single building. It does not condemn a single building or improvement or a single business. The benefits of the new option is it provides a more direct route, and it would only cross Big Branch Creek 1 time instead of 2 times. So far, the city has conducted and performed no environmental impact study on Big Branch Creek, no traffic impact analysis is required, and no application or analysis by the Corps of Engineers is required. This is an internal email that I acquired from the city, dated October 27, 2020, that acknowledges a fatal flaw in the city's concept. This is straight from the email. There's a potential fatal flaw with alternative C that I hadn't recognized before. It looks like it's predicated on relocating Barrett Drive and wholesale redevelopment of all of that property. It also goes through an office condo site on the east side of Barrett, which currently has 41 different property owners. It'll never be publicly initiated with that much private property impact and could only be accomplished by wholesale redevelopment of the entire area. December 2020, took it to the City Council. I presented this to City Council. The City Council revised the comprehensive plan. And the City Council put in the comprehensive plan, in their minutes and in the comprehensive plan, Action AP MT I-440 bridges. And this is what the City Council said. Design and construct 2 I-40 crossings, a multimodal overpass connecting Barrett Drive or Waketown Drive with the southern segment of Quail Hollow Drive. The project will also connect Navajo Drive and Church at North Hills Drive with a new Bridge Street connection. The exact alignment will be determined by a future study. Important. The exact alignment will be determined by a future study. No study has been completed. The study will incorporate the following guidelines. Number 1, avoid condemnation of existing buildings and improvements. Number 2, avoid condemnation of existing businesses. Number 3, avoid multiple crossings of Big Ranch Creek. Number 4, consider a direct connection from Waketown Drive to Quail Hollow Drive in lieu of Barrett Drive to Quail Hollow. And 5, consider an option shown on the maps, and the maps adopted the route that I presented to you. And that, my map is in the City Council minutes, and that was the option that they told them to consider. The city has not completed a study as required by the City Council. Therefore, I submit that approval of the Avondale project would not be consistent with the comprehensive plan at this time. I ask that the Planning Commission deny the Avondale project at this time until the city has time to perform due diligence, avoid condemnation. And I would like to just say in closing that the Midtown Plan has the multimodal bridge as its #1 priority, and the city has still not defined the location of the bridge. The city has estimated so far that it will be 10,000 to 15,000 vehicles daily crossing the multimodal bridge, estimated, but the city still has not performed a formal traffic impact analysis. The city staff has admitted in writing there's a fatal flaw with the current route. The City Council has unanimously approved the restrictions that I showed you. Jason Harden acknowledged at the City Council meeting in December 2020 when Mayor Baldwin asked him specifically, is this reasonable? Can you do this? He said, yes, this is reasonable. And so I would submit the city has a responsibility at this time to stop this, wait, perform the study, decide where the bridge needs to go. Because if you don't, and we don't have a landing location for the bridge on Avondale and a landing location for the bridge south of the Beltline, if we don't define that now and buildings keep going up in places where the bridge would go, then all of a sudden, at the end of all of this, it's going to be Barrett Square left, and Barrett Square is going to be condemned. And we submit that doesn't have to happen. And I'm glad to answer any questions, and I appreciate your consideration.
Thank you. Are there any additional members of the public who would like to speak on this?
Larry Helfont, Midtown resident, 40-year Midtown resident, and member of the Midtown CAC. I'm going to make this really quick because I see we don't have much time. You have 2 zoning projects on your agenda for today. You have Z4521 and you have Z6721. Both of these are critical to the Midtown area. One anchors the north traffic patterns that are going to be created, and the other is on the south side. Z4521 in particular offers 2 benefits to Midtown. It's going to create the roadway that we need desperately to take some of the traffic off of St. Albans, the only connecting route between Six Forks Road and Wake Forest Road. And the connection over the Beltline is the other critical piece that's needed. As Cynthia says, it would be nice to get the city moving and designate where the bridge is going to be, so it actually has a feasibility study. The other thing that's necessary for Z4521, there are over 300 affordable units currently on site. The developer has offered leased affordable housing, which is part of the Midtown plan. They're the first ones to come forward that I know of. I'll make this really quick. I just want to make sure that you recognize they're offering affordable housing as part of this project, and it's desperately needed in this area.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll take it back to the table, and we'll start with some questions or comments from commissioners.
I'll start. I'd like to commend Ms. Curran for her work on just the engagement with the city council and with the city generally with respect to this multimodal bridge. And I was going to actually ask staff if they could address some of these questions and talk about the current state of and status of that bridge project and how it might affect this rezoning case.
And to be a little bit more specific, does the entitlement determine the alignment?
This is Jason Myers from Transportation. To answer that specific question, the entitlement does not determine the alignment. The city has initiated that study. We actually have a 2-hour meeting this afternoon to review the first drafts from our consultant about that. And we are looking at the alternative mentioned by Ms. Curran, trying to find out what is least impactful as defined both environmentally and property and businesses, and it has some understanding of cost. I think that the crucial timing is to have that study complete before a subdivision for that part, the kind of western edge of this rezoning case is submitted, and I think the city's on track to do that. We're likely to be able to bring a comprehensive plan amendment forward to modify that map if that other alignment is better, and take off the one that's currently in street plan, or eliminate the alternative if the Barrett Drive does end up being better, which is a possibility, and there are certainly some significant impacts there. So I'm going to give a chance to my colleagues who are managing that study to maybe step forward and give some more details, but I think we'll have a little bit more information this afternoon. But by the time this goes to City Council, we should have those results, and we should be able to complete that before the subdivision comes in.
Thank you. And I just wanted to clarify, this rezoning case, would that impact the determination of the alignment of this bridge
No.
as it would affect Ms. Curran's properties?
No, the rezoning is for an entitlement, and while it does imply the development process on that land is moving forward, what the zoning district is kind of irrelevant to where the street is mapped. So it's really the subdivision application that is crucial to that process, and they, I imagine, are planning to do that sometime after having a rezoning application finished.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers. Are there any additional questions or comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Raines.
Thanks, Chair Fox. On that note, I guess a question for staff. Can we add a condition for for unforeseen reason the timing doesn't work out, that the subdivision plan is predicated on having the bridge approval prior to? Is that something that could be an option?
I think that may be more of a question for our attorney here about what sort of things a condition could limit if that the applicant does not control. I know, David, do you have can you help with that maybe?
Yeah, if you could restate exactly what you're suggesting.
If for some reason the study from the city is not submitted in time and approved for the bridge relocation or location on the bridge, and the submittal for the site plan subdivision is put forth, is there a conflict there? Can the approval of the subdivision happen after the formal adoption of the bridge? Is there a condition that can be stated as such?
I might be able to shed some light on that. Jennifer Ashton again for the applicant. Just so you all know, there is absolutely no site plan in the works right now for the western portion of the site where that bridge location is supposed to go. So timing-wise, what Mr. Myers just said, I think there's going to be ample time for the city to get that study done before any site plan or subdivision plan comes in from the applicant. Also, too, during the subdivision phase, if for some reason we did get a subdivision application in quickly, there is in the UDO currently, the infrastructure sufficiency requirements. So that subdivision plan may get held up while the city is working out all of these bridge issues. Because again, we are required as part of our subdivision and site planning process to have sufficient infrastructure on that site. And the city has identified this bridge connection as being a necessary infrastructure improvement, not for us to construct, but we need to at least dedicate the land for it. So again, timing-wise, I think what Mr. Meyer stated, there will be ample opportunity for the city to complete its study before we get to that subdivision phase.
Thanks. One other question for staff. The details on the highway landscape density, depth, and all of that, so that's determined by the NCDOT at that time, so that's not something that is available for this application in terms of the details?
Ultimately, it would require NCDOT approval. There is a little bit more detail in the condition that's specified, and there are trees that are planted currently, and basically what it's talking about is between the sound wall and the road. So there are currently some trees that are planted there. I think the assumption is that they would permit some additional trees there, but ultimately that would have to run through NCDOT. There is some language about the number of trees. I could pull that up. I don't have that in front of me unless the applicant happens to have that. But that's why there's a little bit less certainty.
And a follow-up question for staff on the last issue, just wanted to clarify. If the western portion were to be subdivided before the new bridge study is complete, would that subdivision of the western edge impact Ms. Kern's property and how the bridge would?
Most of the uncertainty about the bridge alignment is on the inside the Beltline side. I think you could see that. Depending on the best alignment, and Jason Myers mentioned that there's a couple of variables there, and I think there's no desire on the part of council down to staff to have a maximally impactful alignment on private property. So that's a huge factor in looking how to avoid those impacts. So once there is a recognition of the alignment that minimizes those impacts, then we'll have the final one. But most of the play is on the south side of the Beltline line. Where that line currently is drawn on the north probably could come close to accommodating any of those southern alignments.
Understood. So even, it's likely that the plan will be done first before the subdivision, but even if not, that would not impact Ms. Kern's property.
In terms of impact, I'm not sure I understand.
Impact with respect to the bridge alignment on her property.
I don't think it would definitively dictate one particular landing place on the southern side.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. I had that question as well. Shifting gears, I have a question for the applicant, if they're available. I noticed in the condition, and you did state your notice of tenant does exceed North Carolina law.
Yes.
I have to acknowledge 30 days does not seem like a significant amount of notice in terms of moving. Has the applicant considered an additional amount of notice?
So again, that is just in the situation where we're maybe on a month-to-month tenancy. So the applicant the residents will already know at every 30-day interval they could be asked to leave. So there's already that expectation there that the lease could end at the end of a month. So we thought giving that 30-day notice would, over and above that 7 days that's required by North Carolina law, would be helpful and a good thing. As I mentioned earlier too, once we get into construction drawing phase and building permit phase, we're going to know probably a lot sooner than 30 days before when construction's going to start. We just wanted to make a commitment to you all publicly as to the minimum amount of notice that we would give. But in all likelihood, it will be much more than that.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments?
To that point, I was looking at the EJ screen, and the demographic index for the residents that are living in that area. And given several of the factors, including the higher than average percentage of the population with less than a high school education that are current residents of that neighborhood, combined with the housing shortage and the rental crisis in the area. And even if you find a place that might not have vacancy for 60 days, and then you have to move, and all of the practical issues, and get a combination of that with the points that you made, that you actually think you would know significantly more in advance than that, than 30 days, would the applicant consider providing additional time to provide notice to those residents?
Yes. So if it's a simple change, like changing from 30 to 60 days, and we're not having to come back for, wait 2 weeks, we'd be happy to make that slight modification if the commission is more comfortable with like a 60-day time frame. One other thing I forgot to mention to you all, the logistics of this have not been worked out yet, but the property owner fully intends to have a housing fair for the existing residents to connect them with alternative apartments or townhomes or other housing units, that are affordable within price ranges that they can meet. Again, I don't know when that's going to happen, just because there's no specific plans for this site yet. But that is our intent, to at least connect these residents with information and hopefully get the city involved as well to provide city resources to help with relocation efforts.
I'm just thinking about through the timing challenges associated with this case and the study itself. Can we do our best? I know it's all hypothetical. Can we do our best to kind of figure out how long this process might be? Because I think, for example, one of the thoughts I have is, upon approval of the zoning, you could certainly send out a notice to tenants, and it kind of gives them a heads up. I don't want your client to experience vacancies unnecessarily, but I think that those residents are going to have trouble finding alternative housing in this market, which is unfortunate. Any idea on a potential timing? 6 months, 3 months, 2 months?
For the study of the bridge?
The study, because you're going to be dependent on the study of the bridge, right? And so you're going to lag that study, correct?
Well, so the residents that are on site, they're aware of the rezoning case. We actually physically posted notices on everyone's door to make sure that they were aware, hey, this is going on. If you have any questions, please contact me or contact the leasing office. I heard back from one person, and I connected her with the City of Raleigh Housing Department so that she could start researching options for herself. Again, there are no plans for this site in the works. From what the property owner is telling me, any redevelopment is probably going to be 2 years out.
Yeah.
So again, it's not an immediate thing. We do have a good amount of time to plan how this transition is going to happen.
Additional questions or comments from commissioners?
Thanks. Maybe just a quick clarification about the parking deck conditions. This may be for staff, I don't know. I think I know the answer to this, but the provisions in the UDO that would require active uses on a ground floor for urban frontages would still apply, correct?
That still applies. Yes, we're required to do that. That's the parking deck screening is for anything above ground floor to shield the cars and the lighting.
Right.
Yes.
And it's the conditions in here just align the parking deck screening more with the what's envisioned to be the future requirements in the UDO for.
That's my understanding. Yes, I haven't analyzed the new text amendment that closely, but
right.
Yeah,
the
Urban Design Center originally put out model language for the parking deck screening for all of the developers to use in these more urban projects. That's what we pulled from to create our condition, and it's my understanding that that same language is being incorporated into the new text amendment.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Chair Fox, I didn't want to leave Commissioner Raines hanging. I was trying to figure out what his objective was. The way he described a condition, I think that would be problematic. I think we could reach the objective you're looking at with a condition, but we would just have to word it correctly to avoid some snags from 160D. Basically, you're looking for them to promise not to submit a subdivision until something else occurs, or anyway, there's a way to do it. I think the applicant has explained enough to satisfy you, or maybe not. I think there is a way to do it. It's all about how it would be worded and to achieve that goal.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I think based on the information I've got from staff and the applicant, I'm comfortable with moving forward without a additional condition.
Excellent. So seeing as the entitlement doesn't necessarily determine the alignment, and this case is overall consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, personally, I am interested in that offer of changing from the 30-day notice to the 60-day notice, if the applicant is willing to do so. Are there any additional comments or any declaration of how you'd like to move forward?
Could that 60-day, maybe a question for staff, could the 60-day change from 30 to 60 days notice, could that be a technical change that's made? Okay, so we wouldn't have to wait for 2 weeks. Understood.
And just to let you know, the city attorney's office would like to have discussions with the applicant about the wording of the affordable housing. We think it may be okay, but just want to have one more look through but that would be a non-substantive technical change as well. Just want to let you know that.
Excellent, thank you. Any additional comments? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I move to approve case Z4521 with the one technical amendment, changing the 30 days notice to residents to 60 days notice, and to otherwise recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 26, 2022, contained in the agenda materials.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Elder. Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to approve Z4521. Commissioner Elder has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, I will do a show of hands vote. Those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item on new business, which is case number Z6721, located at the intersection of I-440 at Lassiter Mill Road and Lassiter Mill Road at Six Forks Road.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Don Belk with the Comprehensive Planning Section. Good morning. This rezoning case, the North Hills Assemblage, it's a request to zone slightly over 11 acres from the underlying zoning of commercial mixed use will stay in place. The request would increase height from 5 stories to 12 stories in some areas, and increase from 12 to 30 stories in others, and 40 stories as well. This rezoning site consists of 3 nodes. As you see here, the 440 node at Lassiter Mill and Currituck, bordered by 440. The Lassiter Mill node, which runs along Rowan Street, and then the Six Forks node along Six Forks Road. I would note that there would be one change. The Lassiter Mill node, presently that frontage is parking limited. That would change to urban limited, consistent with the other nodes. Your deadline here is June 25th. Outside of the North Hills area, is predominantly low-density residential, currently zoned R4, and you see that the North Hills Neighborhood Conservation Overlay District lies to the west of the site. To the east, predominantly, this is part of the North Hills complex with office buildings, and then the North Hills East PD there along Six Forks. An aerial representation of this. Note the low-density residential that dominates the area outside of North Hills. Some streetscape perspectives from the various nodes. This slide shows the first view is looking north, Rowannock Gates. This is part of the Lassiter Mill node. And then the Six Forks, image number 2, also looking north there at the Lassiter Mill node. The third view is looking south or looking west along Lassiter Mill there at the corner at the Exxon station. And then view number 4 looking north on Lassiter Mill at Currituck. And a couple of additional views along Six Forks Road. Note image 6 is looking north from the I-440 ramp. Some conditions with this proposal, and I'll note that this is just a summary. Several of the conditions, as you saw from the staff report, are quite detailed, and we do have staff representatives here that can answer more specific questions about those later, but just to summarize, we pointed out the nodes of the rezoning. There are a few prohibited uses. The redevelopment of the property will include a dedication of right-of-way or a payment in a fee in lieu of for the construction of bicycle infrastructure improvements as the city has specified. Also, the applicant will dedicate land for the development of a transit station that meets city specifications. And this is something that's also included in the Midtown Area Plan. Additional bike infrastructure will be provided by the applicant, a minimum of 4 bike share stations. If one bike share station is provided elsewhere on North Hills, then 3 stations will be required on the rezoning site within those nodes. However, there will be a total of 4 overall. And then condition number 6, the applicant has proposed a dedication of 1/10 of an acre of land adjoining Raleigh Fire Station number 9 for the purposes of future expansion or reconstruction of that station to accommodate additional firefighting equipment and personnel. Just to look at the change here, the existing versus the proposed, note the increases in residential density, the maximum number of units. You're looking at both for that and the gross square footage increases there, about an 88% increase in both the number of units and total or gross square footage. In terms of our carbon footprint for this proposal and our analysis, we find that this proposal does have a higher walk score, bike and transit scores than the city average. This is a higher transportation cost index, higher index meaning relatively lower costs for transportation, and the same for job proximity, that there are many job opportunities located within the area. From the affordability standpoint, the proposal will add to the overall housing supply. It does not include any subsidized units. And of course, CX does permit a variety of housing types as well as smaller units. And generally, the proposal is certainly within walking distance of existing transit. From our demographics and land use history, using the EPA's EJ screen, we show that the surrounding area is generally less diverse. It is wealthier and more educated than the citywide averages. The site was annexed into the city in 1959. We found no restricted covenants or historical covenants that restricted racial groups. Notably, the median monthly housing costs in this area have increased almost 22% in the last 5 years, which is significantly higher than the 10% rate for the city on average. The request is consistent with the future land use map, designating this area as regional mixed use. So commercial mixed use fits within that. However, I should note that the requested 30 and 40-story heights do exceed the guidance in Table LU2 as well as within the Midtown Area Plan. Both of those suggest a maximum of 20 stories. We did find this proposal inconsistent overall with the comprehensive plan. I'll speak to that in a moment. However, it is consistent with the future land use map and consistent with urban form. Note number of consistent policies here, particularly compact development, development at freeway interchanges, the composition of mixed-use centers, pedestrian-friendly and infill development. It's also consistent with these policies from the Midtown Area Plan regarding connectivity and pedestrian access, and zoning consistency, and as well Six Forks Road streetscape design. The inconsistent policies really are focused on two general aspects of the case. One, policy LU 2.6, the zoning and infrastructure impacts. And as you noted in your staff report, the reason for that inconsistency is the regarding the capacity of Raleigh Fire to house the necessary equipment and personnel to successfully or to meet federal requirements for public safety. And I believe that Chief Griffin is on hand this morning and hopefully can answer any more specific questions about Raleigh Fire's needs in this area. Also, two other inconsistent policies, density transitions as well as building height transitions. We noted that that contrast in height, particularly for the 440 node, which is R4, and would be fronted by R30, or I'm sorry, a 30-story height. And the proposal does not provide any conditions that would offer any transition measures, design elements such as setbacks and step backs that could serve to mitigate that height contrast. Likewise, inconsistent with these two policies from the Midtown Area Plan, height and affordability, the applicant has not offered any conditions regarding affordable housing. I want to note these outstanding issues, and is Chief Griffin with us this morning, or a representative from Raleigh Fire? Okay. The first condition I mentioned regarding the reservation of 1/10 of an acre for the fire station number 9, the determination of city staff was that the 1/10 of an acre may not be sufficient area for the reconstruction or expansion of fire station number 9. Also, the proposal does not provide any way forward on how we may reach an agreement to have additional space that could accommodate that area. Also, I mentioned the proposed height and the fact that no conditions have been offered that would mitigate the adverse impact of the height disparities with the adjoining single-family neighborhood. And I will note that this is really specific to the 440 node. Thirdly, the applicant has, our staff report did note the review from our Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department noted that North Hills is a high priority area for open space, public art, and public play areas, pet amenity areas. However, the applicant did not address any policies for providing for those priority needs. I will note that we do have 3 PC meetings coming up before your recommendation deadline on May 10th and the 24th, and again on June 14th. That concludes my presentation. I will note that we do have representatives from Raleigh Transportation Planning if there are any more specific questions about the transit center or the bicycle infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we'll hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of Planning Commission. My name's Callie Walker with Kane Realty at 4321 Lassiter at North Hills Avenue. I'll be speaking for about a minute or two, and we'll see the rest of our time to Matthew Carpenter. I'm grateful for your time this morning and excited to introduce the next phase of vertically integrated, walkable, and transit-supported North Hills, a true urban node that supports the growth of Raleigh. Starting with a brief history of North Hills and how it's grown alongside the vibrant city we all call home. As some of y'all know, North Hills was the first enclosed mall between Atlanta and DC, built back in the 60s. In the early 2000s, we began with redevelopment of the Lassiter and Main districts in North Hills. And after the Main district opened in 2004, we moved forward with plans for a 9-story building on the Lassiter node in question today that unfortunately did not move forward because of the recession. Also in 2006, the Park District PD was approved with heights of 35 plus stories. And today, the Main District expansion is under construction that will replace the last vestiges of the old mall with 12-story heights anchored by retail and a half-acre public plaza. That brings us to today's request to transform nodes of underutilized parking to support the exponential growth that our city and North Hills is seeing every day. Looking at North Hills today, we see an urban mixed-use district that's home to abundant retailers and service providers from grocery to gyms to restaurants, and a major employment center, all centered along a walkable corridor. When we think about our city's growth, we can't emphasize enough the importance of growing up and not out in suburban sprawl, and choosing well-connected nodes with existing infrastructure for growth rather than greenfield sites that tax the environment and increase reliance on vehicular transport. This request seeks to place new homes and jobs within the already vibrant and walkable and well-connected North Hills, preparing our city to absorb the continued astronomical growth sure to take place over the coming decades. Much of the area in question is underutilized surface parking, which through redevelopment will be transformed into more efficient mixed-use buildings with structured parking connecting transit and bike lanes to the already walkable grid. This request focuses on the 4 parcels discussed earlier. We feel these parcels are uniquely situated for vertical redevelopment because they are located within a designated city growth center along a transit emphasis corridor and close to existing walkable amenities. We've already kind of gone through the node locations, but we're talking about the Lassiter district node, which is currently surface parking near Brothers Cleaners. The Six Forks node, which is currently an Exxon gas station surface parking and North State Bank and its surface parking. And the 440 node, which fronts along the Beltline and is adjacent to the current Main District expansion. So with that, I will hand it over to Matthew. Thanks.
Good morning, Matthew Carpenter with Parker Poe, 301 Fayetteville Street. Thanks to Callie for introducing the case. I'll focus on the proposed rezoning and our proposed conditions. You've seen that. As Don mentioned, the request is consistent with the future land use map designation and the urban form map. The property is a city growth center, and as the staff report mentions, North Hills is really exemplary of what a city growth center is meant to look like. It's got a mix of uses at varying intensities, and it's well connected to transit and 440 and then Six Forks to get towards downtown. And so the goal of this case is really to capitalize on that momentum and to continue the site's success as a city growth center. And a lot of the policy guidance we're looking to for this case is found in the Midtown Area Plan, which is incorporated into the comprehensive plan and was passed by council in 2020. And so one of the main themes you'll see throughout the Midtown Plan is really a commitment to what the plan calls serious transit. And the idea is to really encourage multimodal transportation along the Six Forks corridor and specifically in the North Hills area. As Don also mentioned, there is a policy that mentions height in the Midtown Plan, and basically what it says is that if the rezoning case is inconsistent with the height recommended by the plan, which here we're asking for slightly more, then the case can be overall consistent with the comprehensive plan if it includes significant public benefits. And what I'll explain with our conditions is that we believe through working with city staff, we've arrived at a place where we have significant commitments to public infrastructure improvements that really go to the overall comp plan consistency. And so here's a summary of our conditions. Condition 1 and 2 are mainly technical. You see the prohibited uses often in a lot of other cases. Condition 3 commits to installing bicycle infrastructure along Six Forks Road in Lassiter, which I'll discuss more in a minute. Condition 4 designates land for the transit center. 5 commits to providing bike share stations, and then 6, land for the redevelopment of Station 9. And so this graphic kind of shows you where the new bikeways will be. In yellow, you can see the Six Forks Bikeway, which will be a 12-foot, two-way separated bikeway, and that's really fulfilling the vision of the Six Forks Corridor Study, and will connect to those improvements that will be done by the city to the north of Rowan, and then push the bikeway all the way south to the 440 ramp there. And then in red, there'll be a one-way or a two-way bikeway, and that decision will be made at site plan. If it's a one-way bikeway, there'll also be another bikeway on the north side of Lassiter Mill in blue. And then in green, you'll see there's also a one-way bikeway fronting the 440 node. A significant portion of that bikeway will also front on the NHX parcel, which is under construction right now. And the developer's looking into the possibility of doing those improvements as part of the NHX site, to kind of take advantage of efficiencies there. This is our bike share commitment, which is just to 4 stations across the site. And this is a commitment to providing land for a transit center. And so this is really our main commitment to the serious transit goals of the Midtown Area Plan. And what this does is designate land for the eventual construction of a City of Raleigh transit center. And we've talked to staff and have included some of their programming and language here. And I can talk more about the process there if there are other questions. But this condition is really unique because I've never seen anything like it, and it's taken over 6 months of discussions with the city transportation staff, city attorney's office to get here, and we're excited to offer it. And then this condition designates land for the future redevelopment of Station 9, and the way this came about was, we talked to the city and met with transportation staff, with fire staff. They don't have a plan yet for the redevelopment of Station 9, but what we were able to do is take Station 22 and the building layout there and overlay it over the Station 9 site. And so on the left, you can see the programming of that station, the driveway in purple, the 2-story program space in green, and then the 3-bay station in orange. And the Durant Road site actually has 2 access drives on Durant Road because it fronts only on Durant Road. The unique thing about this site is it's on a corner, and so we think there's an opportunity for a more efficient site design there that has driveways on Rowan and on Six Forks to create a more efficient site that can be integrated with future development. So as part of this project, our traffic engineers, Kinley Horn, have worked with the city and utilized a new tool that the city's using for more urban mixed-use developments, and that's vehicle miles traveled analysis, or VMT. And so what the VMT does is account for the reduction in vehicle miles traveled from mixed-use development. And so here, what we found with the VMT study was that the overall vehicle miles traveled will decrease by 11% from the current zoning to the proposed zoning. And then we've had several stages of community input, 2 formal neighborhood meetings, stakeholder outreach. We had a dedicated website that's been up since the start of the case, and we fielded 138 survey responses there. We have a designated email. And what that input has led us to is the conditions that you see before you this morning, which are summarized here. And one point I want to make in closing is that this project, this rezoning isn't in a vacuum, but rather will be part of the overall North Hills development, which will have all of the items you listed there. So thanks for your time, and we'll be available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Please come forward.
Are there any others?
Okay, looks like we may have about 3 members of the public signed up to speak. If we all...
There are at least 2 of us
Okay.
that want to speak, not for or against in general.
Okay.
Okay, please go ahead. You can start, and we'll start the clock. In
I have
total,
a presentation.
That's
that I
great.
submitted in advance, so if I could have that loaded prior to the timer. Thank you.
In total, those in opposition or those who wish to speak at this time have 10 minutes. So please split up the time in a manner according to how you'd like to do that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Page down. Okay, thank you. Thank you. My name's Gray Pendleton. Thank you all for your time here. Like many of you, I'm a busy professional. I own a business. I'd like to make a point that the public was given very little notice for this. I had to put together a very amateur presentation in like 6 hours to prepare for this meeting, clear my schedule. So I would just request we have more public, whereas the developers and attorneys can clear their schedule weeks in advance in preparation for this meeting. All right, I'd like to start off with, if anyone's been to Houston, they don't have any zoning rules in Houston. It's a really hodgepodge city, and this is the example we're seeming to follow here. I urge you to vote no, please, Planning Commission members, on this zoning request. Here's an example of, again, the city of Houston here, but just to show you what Kane is trying to put in the North Hills neighborhoods. This is I'm specifically against the node at I-440, Lassiter Mill, and Currituck, bordered on 3 sides by R4 zoning. There's a sunken Beltline that's there as well, but visually not an impairment whatsoever. You can see here, do you want this in Raleigh? Another example of poor zoning, parking deck right next to a single-family house. You might say, hey, this can't happen. I urge you all to drive along Six Forks Road and see what Kane's current developments are. On Six Forks Roads, parking decks and blank walls and exhaust fans. That's what's bordering the street there. And that is how they've done their business in the past. I would suggest that this is something like you'll see bordering Lassiter Mill with the even the current 12-story they have in place now. Here's again another picture here. Again, this is what poor zoning looks like. So, do you want to live here? Is this what you want your streets to look like? All right. You're great neighbors. You're good leaders. You have the power to change the world for good. This is your time to speak out against this inconsistent zoning request. And even as Don mentioned, I believe they're seeking an R30 rezoning right across the street from an R4 with no setbacks, no step backs. Is that what you want? Please save our neighborhoods. We have, again, 3 different neighborhoods that adjoin this node. Please help the city implement its own strategy. In May of 2020, the city planning put out this report, Walkable Midtown, the Midtown St. Albans area plan. In this area plan here, you can see figure 19. I believe it's on page 52 or 62 of the PDF. You can see here that the city recommended, and this was from an earlier report they put out in 2018, that the area abutting Lassiter Mill be revised from 12 stories down to 4. Kane seeks to increase that from 4 to 30 to 40, okay? This is not a slight change. This is a 10 times what the city's recommending. And here it is. This study recommends a reduction in the maximum building height for the area fronting Lassiter Mill Road adjacent to existing single-family residences. Specifically, the recommended building height is a maximum of 4 stories along Lassiter Mill Road, transitioning to 12 stories in the core of the property. This is from the Raleigh City Council, adopted in 2018 and again put out in 2020. I just urge you to reinforce these decisions and recommendations the city has already presented, please. Again, here's another picture of this, of budding Lassiter Mill. The city requests 4 stories. Parker Poe and Kane want to go to 30 to 40 stories here. Is this consistent? Here's an area you can just see R4 zoning all around. Here's an area before. Here's an area after. This is after they tore down the trees there at Lassiter Mills. This is where they want to put a 30-story building, right here, right across the street from single-family homes. Again, single-family homes, single-family homes, single-family homes, single-family homes. These are all single-family homes in the surrounding area, yet they want to put a 30 to 40-story tower right across the street. Please do the right thing for you, for your neighbors, for the city, for your children. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. Before you walk away, can you state your address for the record?
409 May Court, Raleigh, NC 27609. I live right down the street from there. I'd also note that I was here some months ago speaking. They wanted to put a trash input-output receptacle right there as well, and hopefully that was struck down. But yep, thank you.
Good morning. I'm Lubin Pratt. I live at 4213 Wingate Drive in Midtown Raleigh.
Could you repeat your name? I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Pardon me?
Could you repeat your name? I didn't get that.
My first name is Lubin, Lubin, Prevatt, Prevatt. And I'm vice chair for the Midtown CAC, and I'm here today to represent the Midtown CAC. We actually had a public meeting last night with the citizens of Midtown, with the CAC. A presentation was made by city staff members, which you have seen most of here today. Based on that, there was a lot of concern by the citizens about what was happening and the impacts of this project. And therefore, at the end of that meeting, the group proposed and passed a resolution that I'd like to present here today regarding this rezoning Z6721. Proposed resolution for the Planning Commission for rezoning Z6721. With regard to the proposed rezoning, as it does not adhere to existing city policy on building heights and setbacks, does not provide adequate bike paths on Lassiter Mill Road, offers no public transit on site, does not provide sufficient space for the City of Raleigh Fire Station number 9, has no options for affordable housing within the constructed housing, does not conform with the Midtown St. Albans area plan. Matter of fact, I'll commend the previous speaker here on his comments in reference to that plan. That was a publicly discussed plan that was approved in cooperation with the citizens and the city. Therefore, the Midtown CAC asked the Planning Commission to return this proposed proposal to the applicant and instruct them to ensure it conforms to existing city policy. Thank you for your consideration.
Larry Helfont again, from the Midtown area, 40-year resident. I live at 1013 Thoreau Drive. I left that out before. I had a prepared speech today for you, but I think it might be easier to address some of the things that were said earlier. Let's address the obvious one, the buildings across the street first. The zoning for North Hills East was primarily from 20 years ago, before the Midtown Plan. This is what really prompted the development along St. Albans, is what prompted the Midtown Plan. There was no plan for infrastructure of roadways to handle the development that was coming into the area. So almost 20 years later, we developed the Midtown Plan with very specific roadway improvements in it. And to date, as far as I know, nothing has been accomplished to date. You saw on the earlier project that was presented one major step in the right direction that's going to provide some of the traffic to bypass St. Albans, where most of the development is occurring, in addition to North Hills. The second area I'd like to address is building heights, just right out. Building heights has been a contentious problem for, again, a long time. Way back when we first started to develop the Six Forks plan, there was a lot of community engagement, and the one thing that came out very clear is nobody wanted structures more than 20 stories high. I recognize the need for density, but when you get into the clouds, I think you've gone a little too far. The added elevation is going to cause more cost to build the building, more cost to rent the buildings or sell the buildings, and more cost to inhabitants of the building. It's going to become an energy sink. The higher you go, the more of an energy sink they become. It just is unnecessary for the North Hills area. Besides which, it's going to bring in more people, more traffic, more occupancy, and more higher cost. Let's address the other issue, and that's affordable housing. This project is in the Midtown area. It should be adhering to the same policies that were established for the Midtown Area Plan. Affordability is one that's most foremost in the area, yet it was left out of this particular project. It was brought up to the developers, and they just flat outly said they wouldn't address it. We think they should address it. The other thing that's left out of this proposal is Pedestrian Bridge. Again, they cited that it might have to be too high to come across the highway. Six Forks is going to be a multi-lane road. You're almost separating one side of Raleigh from the other side without some means of crossing the road. It's dangerous, and it's got to be addressed at some point. Last but not least, I addressed the firehouse situation. When the plans for North Hills redevelopment first came out, it was inconceivable that they would propose a building on two sides of a firehouse. If you look at the design, it starts from the Rowan side, comes around onto the Six Forks side, and cuts off two sides of the firehouse. Current design of new firehouses is for pass-through. They want to be able to drive, not back their trucks into the fire station, pass through the fire station and come out on the other side of it. Quicker access to better serve the people. And I'll let it go. I see I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Helfont. Now I'll move to questions and comments from commissioners. Does anybody have any questions or comments? I can start us off with a question for staff. The condition related to the transit center is pretty specific and unique. I was wondering if in your report you found the condition related to the fire station allocation of land to be insufficient. Could the applicant craft a condition for the fire station that is similar in nature to the condition related to the transit center, where there's a performance metric associated with it?
Yeah.
That may be a question for the applicant. I apologize.
If I can interject for a moment. You've picked up on a couple of conditions that have been offered that you likely haven't seen previously. And there's a reason for that. Through staff's analysis and report, there were a few impacts that were identified as a result of the increase in entitlement, one of which being the transit need and the other being fire service in the area. So as a result, the applicants have worked with staff in crafting the language that you see today, and staff's appreciative of the time that the applicants have dedicated to trying to solve the issue. But as staff has mentioned in their report, there still are some unanswered questions related specifically to the condition for land dedication for the fire station. I know earlier when Don was presenting, he mentioned that the fire chief was in attendance at the meeting. Chief is here now and can speak to very specific service needs in the area that might be helpful for you during your deliberation. I'd also note that we've got the Assistant Director for Engineering Services here who could talk about the specifics of siting a new fire station on that property and what property needs might be required there, just given their experience in designing fire stations.
That'd be great. If other members of the commission would humor me, I'd like to hear from the fire chief. If you'd like to talk about some of the requirements associated with a fire station at this location.
Good morning. I'm Herbert Griffin, City of Raleigh Fire Chief. Before I start, let me say this. The fire department, we have no say in what happens. We just present data to you as it relates to emergency service delivery. The Raleigh Fire Department is a very diverse and evolving extension of the community, committed to providing superior service to all that we serve. In a professional and humanitarian way, we pledge to protect lives, property, and environment through safe, effective, and timely response. It is my mission to provide professional emergency service in a timely manner to all that live and visit the great city we live in. NFPA, which is the National Fire Protection Association, is a national standard that specifies requirements for effective and efficient organization and deployment of fire suppression operations. Emergency medical operations and special operations to the public by career fire departments to protect citizens and occupational safety and the health of department personnel. Raleigh Fire Station number 9 is located at 4465 Six Forks Road. This is a station that's built primarily in the 60s. House has 2 bays. Currently, there's a battalion chief and an engine company that serve this particular area. When we did a gap analysis on Fire Station number 9, we have identified it for capital improvement process, but it's not in the 5-year capital plan. It's more or less in a 10-year greater plan. With new infrastructure going up potentially, this creates a lot of emergency service delivery impacts. So therefore, that would have to be moved up into the 5-year CIP plan for that, particularly high-rise, mixed use. There's primarily 5 factors that go into place when you talk about putting a mixed-use facility up like this. Number 1 factor is an increased life hazard with high-rise construction, okay? Number 2, the dense and limited parking creates access and egress challenges for large, heavy apparatus. We currently experience that currently. Number 3, high-rise structures require specialized fire apparatus, which is an aerial ladder truck, with the capacity to elevate up to 100 feet. That is the primary issue we have because the closest ladder truck to the North Hills area is 2.7 miles. That equates to a 6 to 8 minute response time for that heavy apparatus. We all know at 4 minutes, the impacts of breathing on a structure fire is very limited. You're not gonna have a survivable patient. It takes every bit of about 15 to 20 minutes to get the area apparatus in, set up, and people on the floor, okay? The 5th one is large outdoor mixed-use venues are commonly considered a large target hazard and pose many challenges for fire and police due to the span of control, which is the number of people per incident. Like I said earlier, I'm just here to provide the data for you and the needs from the emergency service standpoint. I'll be happy to answer any questions related to that.
Do any members of the commission have questions for the chief?
More of a technical question, layout question. With the 1/10 of an acre and the arrangement that they have noted on their application, I'm guessing, in your opinion, does that meet the needs for a ladder truck that would serve the new high-rise that they're anticipating, or would you anticipate a drive-through and larger space in the back to maintain the apparatus and have accessibility from both sides?
Absolutely, that's a great question. For the apparatus that we buy here now in the city of Raleigh, the apparatus is roughly 11 feet height, 64 foot long. So the apparatus bays have to be a minimum of 80 foot. When you back apparatus into the street, you put firefighters at risk of being impacted from drunk drivers, distracted drivers, and everything else. So therefore, we only build stations with drive-throughs for the safety of our personnel. And currently, there's only 2 bays. A third bay we have to put over there, a second bay with 80 foot to house a ladder truck.
Have you done any work, or are you prepared to say how much you would need for a proper station in the area to accommodate the new heights?
Yes, ma'am. That, I think more or less I'll let engineering services address that for you with the proper dimension and heights and things of that magnitude.
That would be excellent. We have someone here from engineering services.
Thank you, Chief. Madam Chair, members of the commission, thank you very much. So my name is Blair Hinkle. I'm the Assistant Director of Engineering Services for the City of Raleigh. Among my responsibilities are the construction of city facilities, including fire stations. So my staff has had an opportunity to review this idea of an additional tenth of an acre and has some concerns in terms of our ability to site a fire station, depending on the size of the fire station. So for reference, the existing Station 9 site is half an acre. When just by way of comparison, Fire Station 6 on Fairview and Overland is just under 0.6 acres. Now, Station 6 is a 2-bay station that requires back ends. As the chief mentioned, that's certainly less than ideal. In addition, there were a number of challenges in siting a 2-bay station on that small of a parcel. So the applicant did, I believe, ask the city what our requirements were for siting a 2- and a 3-bay station on the Station 9 site, how much additional property we may need. In terms of, and again, sorry to keep backing up, but our standard fire station program for a 3-bay station, 1-story, with a pull-through bays is approximately 2 acres. So that's sort of our standard program for fire stations. In this case, in order to construct a 3-bay station on the Station 9 site, we would need, we believe, approximately 3/4 of an acre additional to the half acre. In order to site a 2-bay station similar to Station 6 on the site, again, it would be less than ideal. It would still be a challenge to get a fire station on this size site, but we believe we need an additional 3/10 of an acre, so we believe that we could do it reasonably on 0.8 acres. So if that answers your questions.
Can staff pull up the the map of the fire station so we can have a reference as to what engineering services is talking about?
Was this from the applicant's presentation?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So I believe this is a slide you're referencing. So on the left there, you see that looks like the applicant did sort of a massing diagram there with, I believe, an additional 0.1 acre. One thing to remember is even though the building may fit on the site, there are a myriad of other requirements required by the UDO that we also would have to meet. So things like stormwater management, amenity area, all of the things that any developer has to meet. The city is also subject to those regulations.
So to clarify, Mr. Hinkle, the applicant is offering 0.1 acres, and the city is thinking that what is required is more like 0.3.
That's correct. So we believe that based on our experience with Fire Station 6, again, that was an incredibly difficult station to site, and again is less than optimal in order to get the pull-through bays. But again, that's a 2-bay station, so I would defer to the chief in terms of operation, whether that's appropriate. But to site a 2-bay station with a pull-through, two pull-through bays. We believe we could effectively do that on 0.8 acres.
I do have some thoughts and considerations that I don't know that the 0.8 acres, if that is based on, you know, current demand or if that's on forecasted demand after the 40-story, you know, development. Like, I think that this would be, I think it would be a really big opportunity here to look at how the fire station would be best developed to support the growth that is anticipated, not just today, but beyond. And if there is, you know, the need for setbacks and the storm management and, you know, the turn radiuses and all the things that are important for the fire chief to have a safe and productive fire department there, I think we need to make sure that we're not just asking for the minimum, that we're asking for what is the best for the future growth of this area. I think that there's a lot of development that I'm wondering if 0.8 acres is enough.
Yeah, so again, I would have to defer to the chief for the longer term or operational questions. But what I can say is, in terms of the number of bays of a station, which I think the chief can speak to, you know, what that means in terms of operational capability. We think a 2-bay station we could effectively site on with an additional 0.3 of an acre. We think if we're going to go up to a 3-bay site that we need about 3/4 of an acre more, so a 1 1/4 acre site. So I'll allow the chief to speak.
Thank you. The question you asked, that's a great question. When you talk about futuristic growth, my goal for this city is to make this city resilient for emergency preparedness. 2 bays will accommodate the need as of today. 3 bays makes the organization more resilient. Therefore, if there's an incident in North Hills area, I can shift resources to that particular station, have enough accommodation for them. Right? That's futuristic growth. That's proactive growth, if you really want to talk about it. Right? That makes this city resilient and ready for emergency preparedness. We know this city has a capital, so every day I would go to bed hoping nothing happens in this city, that my personnel prepared, trained, and ready to respond. We have a lot of people moving here. The demographics are shifting very quickly. Okay, we have visitors come to the city also. We want to make sure they have a nice quality of life and a visit when they come to the city of Raleigh. So for me, 3 bay is optimal.
I think from my standpoint, it would be what are the specifics of that so that that can be incorporated into the request.
This may be an obvious question, but for the fire station as it exists today, does the city own that land or is that leased from a private individual? The city owns it?
City owns it.
So the additional portion, the additional tract, would the city buy that land or from the applicant?
Right now, their condition says that they would dedicate the land, which at a minimum would mean an easement. Because I think also they're wanting flexibility to build over this easement. If you read the condition, I don't know whether engineering services wants to make any comment about that, but I know that in some conversations I've had, there's some concern about that little element as well. It's all things would need to be worked out, and not knowing how they would work out has folks concerned.
Sure.
Logically.
Giving up half an acre, there is I understand as a private developer, citizen, that is a expensive ask right at that place, and it's obviously going to provide city services, so I was wondering there.
And I would just add that, you know, my team, again, has had a few days to review sort of some very high-level conceptual massing opportunities here. And so with some additional time, I believe, while 1/10 of an acre is still not likely to get us there, that we'll be able to look at some other opportunities for creative siting, things like that. And I mean, I think certainly there's a path forward here. It's just a matter of getting a little more time to get our teams together and have those conversations.
I have a follow-up question for staff. Has staff looked at other ways in which to achieve this piece of public infrastructure here, something like a development agreement or similar?
It's my understanding that that was initially explored, but that option was dismissed. So the applicant has chosen to offer a zoning condition, which is perfectly fine.
Maybe it's a question for the applicant. Do you want to respond to the additional land needs for the fire department and whether a zoning condition or some other kind of mechanism might?
Yeah, I think we're all on the same page here, and we can come to agreement in the next 2 weeks. This challenge goes back many years. 6 or 7 years ago, the fire department reached out to me about another location, and we proposed a location in St. Albans. It didn't meet the metrics necessary for NFPA standards, and so that wasn't an optional path forward. Now we have a rezoning before us, which allows us to accomplish the fire department's goals. Really appreciate the chief working with us on this, and we are absolutely 100% committed to getting the fire department everything they need. We did this preliminary layout that is clearly just preliminary, that gave us some confidence that as small as 0.1 acres could work. And that's why we phrased the condition as a minimum of 0.1 acres. The only kind of challenge that we're wrestling with in this condition is what is the mechanism by which the city increases that 0.1 acre to a larger portion of land because of the needs of the UDO or otherwise. And so we're open to figuring that out over the next 2 weeks. I'm sure that we can. And I do appreciate the comment about the land designation, because this land is worth about $9 million an acre, and so it's quite valuable. And we do want to try and create an urban, compact fire station that accomplishes all the public safety needs that the chief so well articulated.
So just to restate, you believe you could work on that condition and negotiate with the city prior to the May 10th meeting?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a follow-up question. Well, while you're up here, it's unrelated. I'm going to shift gears. There's been a considerable amount of comment about the height along the Lassiter Mill portion and how that is not meeting the stated goals in the area plan, specifically the height transition with the 4 stories and a step back. Have you all considered, or would you consider clarifying some language related to step backs along Lassiter Mill?
Yeah, we can talk about that as a team. I'll say that the traffic analysis shows that we're actually decreasing traffic. So if you're using traffic as a proxy for density, it's not more dense than what's allowed under the current rezoning. But height gives us design flexibility. One of the comments that we received from the public was that an affinity for the eastern building, which is currently moving in residents, and it's 36 stories, and as compared to the lower scale, boxier office buildings that were referenced earlier. So with that increased height, we have greater design flexibility, can create a better place, and can ultimately serve the growing community that we all know needs to find more places to have people live and work juxtaposed to transit. So we have a great opportunity with this rezoning to solve the city's challenges with multimodal infrastructure by building out the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure for the area. We have an opportunity to solve the needs of the transit center for this area. This is the highest density of transit anywhere outside of downtown, and we need to be able to house people juxtaposed to that transit so that they can utilize it for all the benefits that we know public transit brings. And then lastly, we have an opportunity to resolve a public safety deficiency that existed well before the chief's tenure, and we want to help the city bring that to resolution as well.
Thank you.
Can I respond on the 440 height too?
Yes, please go ahead, Mr. Carpenter.
So just want to clarify, part of the thinking, in choosing the height designations was that the building on the 440 node will be towards the south of that parcel in the red area. And so the idea was for it to be more of a landmark type building adjacent to 440. A lot of the Lassiter frontage, actually in blue, is the NHX development, which is under construction and it's 12 stories at its tallest. And so, there are really, I think, 4 houses that will be across from the 440 node, and then even those that are across from it won't be directly across from the building, which is planned to be towards the southern portion of the node.
Sorry, one thing I forgot. I also, with Zach, we walked out twice and knocked on doors of the adjacent neighbors. Only one of the neighbors was opposed. And in fact, a number of the neighbors have approached us about an interest in redevelopment. So not to say that that's going to happen. There's an NCOD there, but we didn't hear much opposition to the concept from the direct neighbors.
Thank you. That's good context. Go ahead.
Thank you. With respect to this height, I know that we've talked a good amount about the Midtown Area Plan that was passed in 2020. It was passed by council. It was also passed by this planning commission, and with support from and significant input from staff and from the neighbors and from the applicant. But this change along the 440 node along Lassiter Mill does seem like a significant change from what was passed just 2 years ago. And I think it might be helpful if we could, especially if this is coming back from a future meeting, sort of zoom in on that specific node and look at the different heights and the different locations. Is there a site plan at any yet? Didn't think so. Just so that we can better understand exactly the different heights being proposed in this area. I appreciate that you walked across the street and spoke to those neighbors immediately adjacent. But obviously with a 40-story building, it's going to impact more than just directly across the street, and with the sightlines and walkable nature of the entire neighborhood, including the neighbors to the south, since on the other side of 440, since Lassiter Mill goes downhill as it goes to the south. So do we have any additional information at this time or graphics where we can see the specific heights that are anticipated in that node?
We don't with this presentation, but that's certainly something we can put together after the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. So it sounds like we are going to ask the applicant to come back for our May 10th meeting, working with staff in the interim on the fire station issue, and then also providing a little bit more refinement for that 440 node specific to height and the step backs. Is there anything else that commissioners would like to address before we move on?
I did want to state that right along Lassiter Mill, I do have some concerns if it's immediately a 30 or 40-story building directly fronting Lassiter Mill. So I don't know if the other commissioners sort of are concerned or not concerned. I know that we obviously need density and development, and this is a great area for it. But that being said, that's the gateway entrance to a lot of the North Hills neighborhood, and so curious what the specific details are there, and then also just wanted to express some general concerns up front that we may address at the next meeting as well.
Excellent. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, without objection, we're going
sorry.
to...
Can I add one comment or question? I think it was brought up earlier, and maybe this is in relation to the previous comment, but there is the policy in the area plan that has to do with requesting added height and the need for affordable housing that comes with that. I'm wondering if the applicant would have any willingness to address that provision. I do appreciate all the conditions regarding the bikeways, the transit station. I think that's all really important. But just would like to throw that out there.
Would the applicant like to respond to that piece before we move on?
Yeah, We certainly appreciate that and have offered those conditions where we can accommodate that given the economics of the site, the land prices associated with it, the contributions of the fire station land, the bikeway land, the transit center land. We don't feel like that's something that we could accommodate on this rezoning.
I also just wanted to note, since applicants can now only make one revision to conditions, if we anticipate additional conversation and potentially additional conditions, we request that they be considered at the next meeting. Maybe bringing some ideas about the fire station to the next meeting, as opposed, if the applicant is open to further amendments to conditions, as opposed to using up that one shot to change conditions between the next meeting, before the next meeting.
Okay. Would you like them to respond, or?
Is that, are you open to that?
I appreciate that comment. Yeah,
Sure.
we certainly can look at that.
Excellent. All right, without objection, I'm going to say that we are holding this item until our May 10th meeting, where the applicant will come back with some revised conditions. Okay, moving on to new business item D.3, which is rezoning Z7321, located on Leesville Road. Just by show of hands, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, Z7321? No, okay.
Thank you, Chair Fox. So good morning again. Z73, we're looking out into northwest Raleigh at 10909 and 10913 Leesville Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 17.5 acres from R4 to RX3CU. Your deadline is June 25th. Note the city zoning in this area is predominantly R4 with some R10 to the south near the Leesville Road I-540 interchange. To the west is under the county's planning jurisdiction, and that is R40 watershed. An aerial view of the proposed site, note the low-density residential to the west. This area generally is on the fringes of the Briar Creek City Growth Center, and note the more rural residential development to the east, and more intensive development, including some industrial south of I-540. Closer perspective here, note the site's proximity to Sycamore Creek Elementary School, and the R4 development to the west, there at Dunzo Drive. It's zoned R4, but effectively is a higher density than that as a result of the townhome development and small lot single-family home development. Some street perspectives here along Leesville Road, looking north and south. Some photographs closer in to the proposed site from the end of Dunzo Drive. There is a small commercial area northeast of the site within the county's jurisdiction, and also Cape Charles Drive streetscape, and a picture of the Sycamore Creek Elementary School. The applicant has proposed several conditions here. They will limit this to residential and prohibit the apartment building type. They've placed a cap on the residential number of units not to exceed 130. They're also proposing a landscape buffer with an average width of 20 feet along the western property line, and specifications for that buffer. An additional condition regarding the buffer on the southern property line, they'll also be setting aside a minimum of 30% of the net site area as open space. They will include a dog park amenity within the development, and they are proposing a public easement for future access, pedestrian access to Sycamore Creek Elementary School if access is approved by Wake County Public Schools. I understand that the applicant has had conversations and in fact has ongoing conversations with Wake County Public Schools regarding this. Looking at the existing versus the proposed, note changes regarding the overall density and the maximum number of units. Again, that is capped at 130, and some differences here in the setbacks. Given the outlying nature of this location, it does score a lower than average on most of these factors within our transportation and energy analysis. It would add to the housing supply, however, and permit a variety of housing types as noted. It would also permit smaller units and smaller lots than the citywide average. This area is not presently served by transit. The surrounding area, according to our EJ screen, has a lower percentage of minority populations, is less linguistically isolated, and also has a lower population of residents with less than high school education than the city-wide averages. We found no restricted covenants or historical covenants that restricted racial groups in this area. The request is consistent with the future land use map designation of moderate scale residential, and we find it to be consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Note the key policies that are consistent, that the proposal is consistent with these following key policies. And we found no inconsistent policies as a result of it from this proposal. And again, no outstanding issues. And your upcoming meetings before your recommendation deadline of June 25th would be the 2 meetings in May and also June 7th and June 21st in that month. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we will move on to the applicant and those in support. You have a total of 10 minutes.
Good morning, Chair Fox and members of the Commission. I'm Collier Marsh with Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein at 301 Fayetteville Street on behalf of the applicant. Don did a great job of summarizing this project. I'll keep my remarks short and just hit a couple of high notes on it. But again, here's the site, 10909 and 10913 Leesville Road, about 17.5 acres just north of the interchange between 540 and Leesville. Properties in the ETJ will be annexed as part of the process at a subsequent date. So we're proposing rezoning from R4 to RX3CU, and we've got 8 conditions that we're proposing to make the intent of this project clear, which is a townhome development with a large amount of open space. And so those 8 conditions make clear our intentions. The first 2 clarify the use and building types. Again, the goal's townhomes. We cap the units at 130. We've added buffers on the western and southern property line in response to neighborhood feedback. 30% open area is a significant commitment here to have a more walkable, pedestrian-friendly environment. In furtherance of that, we have a dog park amenity, and then we've been in discussions with the Wake County Board of Education on working on a connection to the school to the north. So as a condition, we're requiring a public access easement, but we have had more detailed talks. The final locations would have to be determined at site plan. Our conditions aim to be responsive to neighborhood feedback, so this summarizes what we heard from neighbors, requests to add buffers, those were added, concerns about density, added open space, and then concerns about school assignments and connection to the school, and that's part of the genesis of that school connection that we've offered. This is the conditions in their full detail, quite a bit lengthier than summarized. The ones in blue are the ones that were added in response to neighborhood feedback. We hit the nail on the head with moderate density residential. It calls for RX districts. It calls for density between 6 and 14 units per acre. With our cap, we're at 7.2, and it calls for the building types and the uses we're proposing. Consistent with the comprehensive plan, as Don noted, 9 consistent policies, 0 inconsistent policies. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to verify that there are no members of the public here to speak on this item before I move on. Okay, let's move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Fox. Question for the applicant. Is there a planned connection from Leesville to the Dunzo Drive for vehicles?
Yes, so it would be essentially any development would make that connection directly through to Leesville, and the location of that connection, Leesville, is essentially dictated by what DOT will allow. The latest we've heard is that we'd get right in, left in, and right out on Leesville.
Do we have any additional questions or comments for the applicant or staff?
I may have missed this when I was out, sorry about that. The emails that we received were mostly about traffic in this area, and I was wondering what, and again, if it's been addressed, apologies, but if the traffic patterns along Leesville have been addressed in terms of any projects that are capital improvement projects that are already coming down the pike.
This is Jason Myers from Transportation. Don, can you help me grab the your slides? Is that this one? Nah, forget that this is not my touchscreen. Apologize. I figured I would use a map to help me here. Okay. So in the short term, you know, Leesville Road was very recently widened at a pretty great expense to the city. And that project, I'll highlight it here, was roughly from this point to the interchange. And I don't necessarily think that there's large scale capacity issues there. There are certainly operational concerns, and oftentimes the main thoroughfares take precedent in our traffic operations patterns and NCDOT's operations patterns, and that creates some frustration for folks on side streets. But in the long term, there's a couple of major improvements that are planned, many of which will be executed at least partly through development. One of which is a connection from ACC to Leesville here, which will then kind of realign Leesville with Westgate. And there is land already dedicated for an interchange here at I-540. Now, long term, those things will do a lot to increase capacity in this area. The only part of that I think is really in the foreseeable future is the east-west connection from Briar Creek to Leesville. The city has been doing a functional alignment for that, trying to figure out how to snake it through all the wetlands and things, working with some of the property owners in this area. I'm sorry, let me undo that. In this area, which includes the city's park site for the racket and tennis center, to help understand what's happening there, and we believe that the Page Farm is likely to be redeveloped in sometime in the foreseeable future, though I don't think they've taken any concrete steps towards that. The interchange addition for what we call the make sure I get this right, the Westgate. Well, the Westgate extension, that interchange is probably a much further off thing with a state project to be able to put that in. On a more site-specific scale, let me go into here. There is a new development that's under construction right now that is creating a new street that connects the back of this development into, so it provides another way out. And of course, I would very roughly expect the development of this to have a new street here. That additional street grade provides a lot of ways to reduce travel distances, kind of reduce the density of trips coming into one particular location, and is really how we do our subdivisions and have for some time now. Is there any other questions I can answer about this information?
Ever since the expansion of Leesville Road, thank you, that's helpful. With the expansion, I know that some of these new residential developments don't have streetlights when they're trying to turn in and out of that development. Is that something that is going to be addressed with this project?
Streetlights on Leesville Road?
On Leesville, yes.
You know, I would have to follow up with that. I think that what may have happened is that the installation of those streetlights has lagged a little bit from a relationship with Duke Energy Progress, and I could find out from my colleague, you know, what the status of those are, but I honestly do not have that information with me right now. Sometimes those streetlights are put in with development by the developers asking, and as a part of our street acceptance standards, but why they're not already on Leesville, I could not tell you right now.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any additional questions or comments for either the applicant or staff? I'll start with one comment. I do appreciate the proactive conversation with Wake County Public Schools and making a connection. I think that's well received. Seeing no other comments, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Raines?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I also, on an additional comment, I appreciate the open space, dog park, and connection to the school as well. So I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated April 26, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment case Z7321. The action taken is reasonable in the public interest, because it would create additional housing supply and provides new residential development and more homes adjacent to a public school.
Okay, Commissioner Raines has offered a motion to approve Z7321, and Commissioner Mann, Vice Chair Mann, has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, we will vote by a show of hands. Those in support? Aye. And any opposed? No. That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item D.4, which is rezoning case Z9221 on Nowell and Corporate Center.
Good morning, Chair Fox and member of the Planning Commission. Let me get my presentation up and we'll get started. All right, so this is Z9221, a request to rezone 5.39 acres from an office park designation and a residential 4 designation to residential mixed use with a 5-story building height limit and zoning conditions. Your deadline is June 25th for a decision. So this is the zoning map of the area. There is a broad mix of zoning designations, including residential, office, commercial, and some industrial uses. You can see those demonstrated on the map here. A look at the aerials. So the site is currently built with just a single house that is on Nowell Road on the right-hand side of the property there. You can see moderate and low-scale residential uses to the north and east. And then to the west, there are office uses and a hotel and another medium-scale residential use going up at the intersection of Corporate Center and Chapel Hill Road. And then you can see to the south, Lincolnville Road, low-scale residential neighborhood, and just south of that, some industrial uses. So this is another look at the property. You can see that it's wooded. There is a house there on the front. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see where the Lincolnville Street and neighborhood is. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see those 3 and 4-story apartment buildings going off into the north. And on the top side of the screen is where those office and hotel uses are. So there is a zoning condition that limits development of the site, limits residential development to a maximum of 235 units. This is a comparison of the existing and proposed zoning. So right now, the R4 portion of the combination of properties could produce 3 units, but the majority of the properties are zoned office park, and so a 56,000 square foot office building could be built there today. That would be 3 stories tall. The proposed zoning for 5 stories it would allow 5-story buildings to be built, of course. A minimum of 2,000 square foot office and 4,000 square feet of retail uses are the permitted non-residential uses that make the RX district residential mixed use. So there are small set-asides for non-residential uses. So what you see here is really a shift from an office park, office use to housing and residential uses with some ancillary non-residential use. So lower bike, walk, and transit score compared to much of the city. There aren't a lot of places nearby to walk to. There is mostly residential and office use. So those trips that people take to go shopping or get to work are more likely to occur in a car. That said, there is still lower transportation costs in this area, and that's because of its proximity to downtown and other employment centers. So albeit auto-oriented, driving to and from this location is cheaper than a similar type of development pattern out in the far-flung suburbs. So if you're more likely to have to own a car here to do your daily errands or getting to work, but because it's close by, you'll spend less time in your car and spend less money maintaining and paying for fuel and the other things that go along with car ownership. And again, close to a lot of jobs. There are offices nearby, so that's some job proximity, but also a short drive into downtown as well. This is the transit route here, and the property we're talking about is in this location. I should have marked it on the map. My apologies. So this is the Route 26, and it provides 30-minute transit service to Crabtree Valley Mall. It adds to the housing supply. There are not subsidized units included. It does permit a variety of housing types. Of course, the mixed-use building and apartment building types, which are the least expensive housing type that is constructed, are allowed there. So likely smaller units than a detached single-family alternative, relatively less expensive housing than what the predominant building mode in the city is, which is detached housing, which is more expensive and less attainable for moderate and low-income families. So mixed-use buildings and apartment building types allow for smaller lots if something was developed in a less dense or single 2- or 3-story apartment or townhouse development type, but again, less expensive than the detached housing alternative. And there is some transit nearby, again, that 30-minute service to Crabtree Valley Mall. So demographic indicators here. What this is basically telling us is that the area is wider than the city as a whole. People who live in the census tract have higher levels of education and have higher incomes and are younger compared to the city's demographics. So the area likely contained some portions of one of Raleigh's original 13 freed people's villages, dating back to 1969, just a few years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And by 1900, the Lincolnville area had a store, at least one church, which is still in the area today, and around a dozen homes. The Lincolnville community was demolished in 1904 and was made available for the expansion of North Carolina Agricultural and Mechanical College, which is now NCA&T. And again, the Lincolnville AME Church still stands nearby. So I'm going to just read what I wrote in the staff report because I think it really gets to what I want to say about the demographics and history here is that the rezoning request will do little to impact the segregationist history that necessitated Lincolnville's establishment in this location following the Emancipation Proclamation. And the rezoning request will do little to repair the harm caused by demolishing the Free People's Village and displacing its residents. That said, development under the proposed zoning is more likely to benefit Black, Indigenous, and people of color households because of the relative, comparatively lower cost housing in apartment and mixed-use buildings, lower transportation costs, and close proximity to jobs, goods, and services. So because race is the primary indicator of wealth, development under the proposed zoning in areas with these attributes in terms of low cost of transportation and high proximity to opportunity is likely to help provide opportunity to Black, Indigenous, and people of color households. So that's all I'll say about that. So the request is inconsistent with the Office Research and Development future land use designation, which specifically says residential uses are not appropriate in this location. Most of the properties to the north of here that have the same designation are already developed with multifamily housing, 3-story apartment buildings. So it is inconsistent with this policy. The Planning Commission and the City Council have directed staff to reevaluate the future land use map designations of Office and Research and Development and others. I believe you all made a recommendation that we do include kind of analysis of that in a previous progress report. And the reason that it merits some further analysis is this is unique in our comprehensive plan in that it is recommending single use, office uses, and not mixed uses or residential uses. So we have office and residential mixed use designations that would say areas are appropriate for offices and for people to live. And that is really more in line with what the applicants are requesting here. So that work is ongoing, and hopefully we can tackle it in our upcoming work program in the following year, but some outstanding work for us. So that all being said, the request is inconsistent with the existing policy, specifically prioritizing office uses and deference to housing. Let's see. The request is also inconsistent with the urban form map, which would recommend a frontage here, bringing buildings closer to the street, likely Nowell Road because of the geometry of the site, so encouraging more people to walk and instead of driving. We also know that the built environment, based on those metrics today of low walk score, low bike score, low transit score, is going to require a lot of people to take car trips instead. Adding an urban frontage and bringing that building closer and encouraging that will help change and shift, hopefully, the development pattern of the area to something that is more walkable. The other piece that might improve walkability is the set aside for non-residential uses in the residential mixed-use designation, allowing that 4,000 square feet of retail or the 2,000 square foot of office. That provides a destination for someone to walk to, so they don't have to get in their car and drive somewhere else to go get a coffee or whatever it is they're doing. So having an urban form frontage here would improve that condition. So into the policy analysis, of course, a more compact development pattern, just allowing housing here. Again, 3 units can be built today. They're requesting for 235 units to be built. Most of the site prohibits the housing use outright with that office park designation. So a big swing there. Buffering requirements, so 4-story buildings in residential mixed use and taller, so 4 or 5 and up, require neighborhood transitions in the Article 3 of the Unified Development Ordinance. So that would satisfy the buffering requirements of this policy. I'd also say that the southern end of the site includes some topography and stream channel that would also naturally require buildings to be built further from that Lincolnville Road neighborhood. The requirement of the UDO and I think the topographic realities of the site, or bringing buildings closer to the northern property line where those other apartments are. So again, we touched on this, inconsistent with the future land use map and the frontage designation. This is your deadline, and again, because it's inconsistent with the future land use map, the map will be changed from office research and development to medium scale residential, as is shown here. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Clem. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Do you know if it's this one? Okay, let's try that.
What date is that?
I think this is.
That's not the one we submitted yesterday. We switched down the order a little bit, but I can go back and see what it is.
It's 422. Yeah, I don't have it here. Having a issue with the applicant presentation. Can go and try to pull it really fast. I don't know if you want to.
Well, let's go with the old one. We'll make it work.
Okay. I'm not seeing one at all for your. We have the staff presentation, and then we have this presentation.
Yeah, I change it up a little bit.
Okay, but this is yours.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we did revise it, but we can work with that.
Understood. There you go. Sorry.
Good morning. I think it's still morning. My name is Isabel Maddox. I'm here today representing John Bruckle, the prospective developer, and also who is here. And also here today is our architect, David Bryson. Matt did a great job and a very thorough job of presenting this request and telling you about the area. I would take issue with one thing, though, and I'll go as I go through my presentation, I think that'll become apparent. His walk score is lower than my walk score. I think it's already a pretty good mixed-use area, and I think our project will add to that. So this is just the overall map. You can see there are a lot of things that are very close by. I'm going to go out of order of these slides. So this is the mix of zonings in the area. As you can see, the colors, there's a lot of RX, there's CX, there's OP, there's R4, there's IX. It's not an office park area. And this kind of gives you an idea of the types of uses that are somewhat south of our location. We've got Highwoods Office, we've got the Hyatt Hotel, which has 7-story zoning. We've got industrial, mixed use. We've got another hotel, we got office, we got apartments under development now. This number 8, let's see, I don't know how to do that. We've got a daycare, we've got multifamily. So you see there's really a broad variety. And then these are the zonings north of the site, which again, you can see the variety of colors, the variety of zoning designations. And these are some of the uses that are actually in place. Service uses, apartments, 5 stories, apartments. Wells Fargo has an office use there. And there's a Palisades under construction to the north. Continuing on, the slide that was left out of this presentation, which I added to the one that was submitted yesterday, is the future land use map. And Matt had a good slide that showed a good bit of this area is designated for office park, which does not allow residential, but there are multiple apartments that are already developed and existing in that office park designation. I think underscoring the fact that it's not really an appropriate designation for this location. And, you know, I think the designation itself is a little outdated, as you saw in the update from I think it was in 2020. There was an update to the comprehensive plan that sort of raised the question of, is this really appropriate? Does it really serve the city's goals of mixing uses so that you can live, work, play in the same area? And does it serve the city's goal of increasing housing supply? The next thing I wanted to look at is our conceptual site plan. Again, this is conceptual. It's certainly not a fully engineered site plan, and there's a lot of engineering that needs to be done on this site because there's a lot of topo. But we would propose up to 245 multifamily units and associated parking, and a good number of the parking places would be under the building in the center of the site. So the bigger building would have parking underneath, as well as the surface parking that you see. There is a significant neighborhood transition buffer here and adjacent to the single-family residential down here. And so given the heights that we would expect here, this buffer will be bigger than the 50 feet because you have to go, you know, at 50 feet you can only be 40 feet in height, and you have to go back one foot back for 1 foot up. So we think that buffer will be at least 70 feet, maybe more, depending on how high the building actually goes. Also, adding to the separation of feet, linear feet, is the grade. So the Lincolnville single-family area down here is about 40 feet lower in site. So not only do you have a good linear distance, but you drop off considerably in terms of elevation. And so that when the residents of Lincolnville are in their backyard looking backwards, they're not going to see the apartments. They're going to see a wooded hillside. And the apartment dwellers, in the winter, there might be a floor that can see a little bit of rooftop. For the most part, they're going to be looking out above the single family. We believe that there'll be 70 feet at least between the closest building and the neighborhood lot line, and probably at least maybe 107, 110 feet from building to building. So there'll be a pretty good distance. Other things that I want to note, we are on transit line, and again, my slides are not in the order I had sent. We are on Route 26, which comes down and goes on by Nowell Road. Also, importantly, we're close to the western BRT. It's about within a half mile. And I talked to Chair Fox last week, and she was asking me about bicycle infrastructure here. In fact, there are bike lanes on Corporate Center Drive, and Chapel Hill Road is a preferred bike corridor. So I think that'll get you a good bit of the way towards the BRT via bike, if that's what you chose to do. We talked about the inconsistency with the future land use map and the fact that designation is probably not appropriate in this area. The other issue that staff pointed out was the frontage designation. We have chosen not to add a frontage here for a number of reasons. First, we have as you've seen, the site it's got frontage on 2 streets, but the frontage on the street frontage on Corporate Center is very minimal. It'll only accommodate a driveway, and so that would be a complication. More importantly, the site's very narrow, and it's hard to make that 50% requirement if you did parking limited work. We've got a major neighborhood transition buffer there. We also have some restrictive covenants that require a wooded buffer along Nowell. And our conversations with the neighborhood, they preferred more woods along Nowell. So for those reasons, we have not put a urban or a frontage designation on it. But we do, as you can see in our site plan, the proposal would not put any parking between the building and the street. There would be some parking beside the building. So we don't intend any parking between the building and the street. In conclusion, we think this is reasonable in the public interest to rezone this to RX5 and to redesignate the comprehensive plan or future land use map designation to either moderate density residential or office residential mixed use, which is what I think actually makes more sense. We do think we are protective of the single-family residential to the south with the large neighborhood transition buffer and the significant grade change. We're adding to the housing stock of the city. We're contributing to what is already a good mix of uses in this site. It really does allow people to live, work, and play in this area. And I have a couple of slides later down that show there's some more employment-type uses in addition to the major office uses more to our west. And then we have some entertainment uses, within walking distance. I mean, if you're on a football Saturday, you could walk to Carter Finley easy. You can walk to RBC to go to a concert or to a basketball game. You can walk to the state fairgrounds, where it's not just for the fair, they have music events all the time, and flea market, etc. You've got the Drive Shack is not far away. So there are a number of entertainment uses within walking distance, and there are several restaurants within walking distance. You've got Backyard Bistro, Bojangles, Wendy's, McDonald's, all reasonably close. You also have some convenience-type uses, Sheetz, O'Reilly Auto Parts, Citgo, very close by. So I think there is a good mix of uses in the area now. We think we'll be contributing to that. And I consider this a very good horizontal mixed-use area. So I think it addresses the city's goals and in this city growth center. And we would appreciate your support on this case and are available for any questions.
Excellent, thank you. I just want to check in if there are any members of the public who are here to speak on this item. Please come forward. If you both want to come down, we're going to have a total of 10 minutes for those in opposition to speak, and you can split up that time between you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Kenneth Haywood. I'm with the law firm of Howard Stallings, 5410 Trinity Road, and I'm here on behalf of one of our clients, Bell Dakota, who has property in the area of which we speak, and wanted to speak primarily today related to the height, the CX5 change from the R4. And with regards to that, I think that certainly from what Isabel said, there is multiple different uses in this particular corridor of properties, but I think that it would be hard pressed to find in terms of multifamily something that's up to 5 stories. Even I think from what you heard from Matt, the multifamily that's existing in the area is 3 to 4 stories, and I think that that would be a much more appropriate height designation than 5 stories. You do have the consideration, although I don't represent the Lincolnville residents, of the fact that you have a community of 1-story homes immediately to the south of this project. I think could be debatable as to whether they're going to be able to see this project or not. And then you have a multifamily to the north immediately adjacent that is, I think, more of a 2 or 3 story scale. And so if you look at the urban design guidelines and you see in terms of what they're requiring in terms of transition, there's really not a lot of transition in terms of the height. You're going from 1 story to a maximum of 5, or perhaps 3 in the north up to 5. So I do wish the commission would look in terms of what the height is on this. You do have a very small site. It's only 5 acres. They're seeking to ask for 235 units, and so that's a very dense site. Contrast that with the fact that our client's property in the area is over 14 acres. And so you're putting a lot of units on a fairly small site related to that. So we just would request that the commission view this in terms of the height, perhaps have further conversations with the applicant about perhaps having that height more compatible with what's in the area of a 3 or 4 story designation, and I'll turn over the balance of my comments to any other individuals in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bruce Mamel. I'm at 904 Cedar Downs Drive. I live in the Null Point subdivision, which is the little yellow R4 to the right of the 21 there. I've lived in this area for 30 years, and I've seen all of the growth along the way. I was the chair of the West CAC back in the late 90s, and I spent a lot of time on zoning cases. I participated in the original Arena Small Area Plan, and the dots here, the numbers here represent all of the existing residential in the area, most of which is 3 and 4 stories. I'm not going to insult you guys and read my whole little presentation to you. You can read all the way through that on your own. But what I want to impress upon you is that hundreds of hours, hundreds of man hours, and a lot of effort has gone into planning in this area. When they did the Arena Small Area Plan, they said it was that it was going to be the geographical center for a 25-mile radius in this region. We've got, the Art Museum, the Fairgrounds, Umstead, Cary next door, which is, Fenton Development. We've got a lot going on out here, and I want you to be very careful in your analysis as you move forward. I think this area could get away from you very fast in terms of development. And what I mean by that is that development is a great thing, but all of the things that were in those small area plans still need to come to fruition. So when you talk about walkability, I can't walk out of my neighborhood. When you talk about bike lanes, they're intermittent. And I'm not complaining here. What I'm saying is you've got these little hubs in the area, and you need to connect all the dots to make it amenable for everybody to use. As it is, I mentioned you can walk from the Sheets at 54 and Corporate Center Drive over to the PNC. Well, so what? I can't walk to the grocery store. I can't bike to the grocery store. There's one a mile away, and it's been that way for many years. Now, with regard to the height limit on this place, this proposal, 1-story, small African-American neighborhood sandwiched in between a new 3-story apartment complex to the south, and you're going to have, about 80 feet next door. They talk about the grade there. And I went out there with a clinometer, and I measured the height of the trees and all that. I maintain that you'll be able to see those buildings from where they are there. And then on the north side, you've got another 3-story apartment complex, and they'll be right there at the setbacks. There are some APAB 23 and 24 in the Arena area plan. One refers to the I-40 and Wade Avenue development, where they talk about height limits with regard to commercial development next door to residential. And then in APAB 24, they talk about what do you do transition-wise with the older neighborhoods. So I would oppose 5 stories because I think you're going to open the door with a precedent here. Anybody else comes down the pike here in the future is going to say, well, you gave them 5 stories there. We want 5, 6, 7. So how do you make all these pieces of the puzzle fit? We proposed, going back 20, 25 years, saying that we wanted residential in that designation as time went by. So when you say, well, we've got the flume, we got the UDO, we got the comp plan, you can pretty much cherry pick your words to make it work one way or the other. And that's okay. I'm not complaining about this because you guys have to work that out. What I'm saying is that in this particular instance, I just think it's incompatible. I wouldn't want to see office in there, but I would prefer to stick with the character of the area. Aesthetics matter, character matters. This area is going to only continue to grow. You're probably familiar with bandwidth up on Reedy Creek and Creedmoor. Well, the fairgrounds then got busted for putting their giant parking lot in the woods there, which they're still working on. So there's going to be demands made on you regardless of whatever these plans are. That's my point here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mammal. Please go ahead, Ms. Maddox.
Just a couple of responses but to both of the opposing speakers. And can I get back to my presentation? On the subject of height and character of the area, there's already 5 stories all over this area. There is a 5-story apartment complex. Let me go to right. The Dakota, which is Mr. Haywood's client, located to the north, that's 5 stories. And then there is an apartment complex being built on the corner of Chapel Hill Road and Nowell Drive that's 5 stories. So there's 5 stories right there. And I think the character of I don't think this changes the character of the area because we already have significant, and we have more stories in zoning designations. I think there's some 7 and 5 in this area, and 4, 5, 7, 4. So I don't think we're really changing the character, and I think there's precedent for 5 stories in this area. As far as the policies of the arena plan, I mean, I agree with Mr. Mammal that was, a lot of work went into that, but, we've evolved a little bit since that time. We heard requesting 40 stories in North Hills, which is, a lot. But I don't think 5 stories here is too big of a push. As far as access, part of this development will improve the sidewalk and bike facilities by sidewalk addition and widening of the road and putting in bike lanes adjacent to the site. So I do think we'll be addressing some of those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to allow equal amount of time for both sides, is there any other member of the public who wishes to speak on this item? Okay. I'm going to pull it back to the table for questions or comments from commissioners.
Thank you. With respect to the height, the current designation is OP3. That's a 4-story height designation, is that right? For staff?
OP3 would be 3 stories.
It would be 3 stories? I thought the application said it was currently allowed to have 4. Maybe not. Maybe that's what the 3 means? Is that what you're telling me? Okay. What about with respect to the buffers? I know that this project is going to include some close to 70 feet of buffer space. Would that kind of buffer, what type of buffer would be required under the current zoning entitlement if it were developed to be an office?
Yeah, so I would need to look, it's in Article 3, so there are 3 components and transitions to that buffer. It includes a restriction of uses. It includes, so I think there are limited uses that can go there, like parking and other types of things can exist in that first piece of the buffer. The second is a landscaped yard, which would include a planting schedule of shade trees, understory trees, and shrubs. There are several options to choose from in the code. And several widths and sizes of those. I think that section also would include some sort of fence or wall, depending on which selection was chosen. And then there is some height transition. So that basically has built-in step-back requirements for adjacent structures taller than 3 stories. So basically how the code works is the neighborhood transition requirements have a menu of options that the developer chooses from when they go to pull a permit, basically. But there are several outcomes to what exactly happens there.
Understood, thank you. I was just trying to understand the difference between the current entitlement. Obviously, right now it's undeveloped, and so it's sort of hard to conceptualize what the current entitlement would allow in terms of development on this area versus what is being proposed. So I know that the proposal includes a significant buffer, vegetated buffer, and it sounds like there are some buffering requirements for the existing entitlement, but not as robust. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, I think because the request is asking for additional height, that additional height would have to be further away from the property line than. But even under the existing zoning and proposed, 3-story buildings can occupy the same space and distance from the properties to the south. where the 4 and 5-story buildings get built or exist in the future development, those areas would be further. So, you know, just like all zoning, they're asking for a 5-story building, but they may build a 3-story building, in which case that 3-story building could be closer.
Understood.
So if they chose to build 4 and 5, it would have to be further or follow those step-back requirements of the neighborhood transition standards.
And I just wanted to note on the other point, I think I'm not crazy. The rezoning application in the agenda materials does say the existing zoning allows for 4 stories, and the proposal goes to 5 in the application itself. But that's not the case. The existing only allows to go for 3.
Correct. Yeah, the office park 3-story conditional use zoning is the existing zoning district for most of it. You can see it right here. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have a clarifying question. I want to make sure I heard you correctly, Ms. Maddox. Did you say that there's a restricted covenant to require a wooded buffer on the now frontage?
Yeah, and yes, there is a restrictive covenant in place. It's a little bit confusing because of the way it was imposed on the property. Right now, it would require a wooded buffer along Nowell. There's a chance that gets, it was attempted to be fixed, be removed, but it wasn't effectively done. So it just adds a little bit of additional layer of confusion as far as how that street is addressed.
Thank you. That addresses my primary concern, was about the lack of an urban frontage, but given the existence of the restricted covenant and some of the requirements for the layout associated with putting the buffer on the southern edge, I no longer have a concern about that. Do any other commissioners have any questions or concerns they'd like to discuss? Commissioner Elder? Or?
So I'll just say that I actually used to live in Nowell Point subdivision, so we must have been neighbors, Mr. Mammal. And I remember feeling very distinctly how you feel about that. It was a lovely neighborhood, disconnected from all of the conveniences nearby. So on one hand, I think it is fantastic that this development will provide more walkability and improve some of that infrastructure to connect the neighborhood to nearby amenities. However, I think Matt had a point when he said that it is still disconnected to many of the things. I think you noted the bus access at Hillsbury Street, and that's actually just looked back through to make sure, to see what improvements have been made. I haven't lived in the area in a little while, but do I understand, and I believe the applicant mentioned that there is also a development going in at the corner of Chapel Hill and Nowell, and will that make the sidewalk then continuous from Chapel Hill Road all the way to Trinity? Or is there still going to be gaps where, technically it's walkable. Hillsbury Street is walkable from that neighborhood in that area, but I would not feel comfortable walking in the grassy area on the side of the road. So while it's technically transversable, I would not feel comfortable with traffic kind of walking on the roadside like that.
Yeah, if I can just say, yes, this red mud that you see on the slide here is where a 5-story apartment building is currently under construction. So that's happening now. It was a rezoning case from several years ago that is now being built. I believe the hotel is also a 7-story building. So they are required to improve the frontage of those sites when development occurs. So yeah, there would be continuous sidewalk along that property frontage. In terms of walkability and the scores that come from walkscore.com, it two things. It accounts for existing infrastructure, so are there sidewalks? But the other piece of walkability is not just a place to walk, but a place to go, right? So a destination that is within walking distance. So the citywide average for a walk score is like 31, and this site is 28. So less than, but similar to the city's overall walkability. And I think that is, again, impacted by existing infrastructure and things that are within walking distance.
And I think the corner that I was actually asking about is the corner of Chapel Hill and Noel. Is there, or did I hear that wrong?
Oh.
That there's something going in there?
Here? I don't know offhand. I could.
It's approved for 5 stories.
I see. Okay. So essentially, there is still a little bit of a gap there where presumably sidewalk will not happen in those areas until those parcels are developed. Is that right?
But that's, it's incremental. New facilities come in as properties redevelop, and so when they redevelop, the sidewalk will be more continuous.
Mr. Mammal, would you like to say something else? Without objection, I'd like to have you respond if you'd like.
You and your slide presentation, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't know. It's near it would be this one, 21. That's the corner of Chapel Hill Road and Nowell. That'll be going in. That was administrative site approval. So they'll have sidewalk around the perimeter of their property there.
That's here.
Right, and so this area here, right here, doesn't have any sidewalk. There won't be sidewalk from approximately there to there. And then, when development goes in, they gotta put in sidewalks, right? So you gotta go back and forth across the road. We've been doing that for quite a while. But that, and then coming there, over here along Chapel Hill Road, you'd be a fool to ride a bicycle on Chapel Hill Road. It's just, you're taking your life in your hands. So the walkability there is kind of hit and miss. Corporate Center Drive, you can go all the way down Corporate Center Drive, cross Trinity, cut through behind Cardinal Gibbons, get down to a tunnel that'll take you to the PNC. And then, but coming back across from Nowell, the other way across the railroad tracks to this BRT corridor, you can't get there. If you can't go down 54 to Westover, you can't go down 54 to Germantown Road, which goes straight across, and they're putting a light in there across the railroad tracks right now, but there's no sidewalk. You can't get across the tracks, and then once you get across the tracks, there's no sidewalk for about 200-300 yards till you hit one little apartment complex where they've got a little bit of stretch of a sidewalk there. So it's just, as Isabel said, it's intermittent or incremental.
Thank you for that additional context. I will say I'm very familiar with the area as well, and there are a considerable amount of what I'd call walkability gaps. However, I'll also note the way that you fill in those walkability gaps is by actually allowing development, because development is what builds and fills in those gaps. Do we have any additional questions or comments? Go ahead.
I just have some quasi-personal curiosity ones. The development, I think I heard correctly that there's going to be parking. You're going to have parking underneath as well. And I guess, are there, I know the site plan, it's not necessarily part of our process. Are there going to be 3 bedrooms offered?
I think there are a mix of bedroom types proposed at this point. I can't tell you the exact mix. I don't know that there'll be any, or have we talked about 3? Mostly 1s and 2s.
Okay, there's a huge need for 3 bedrooms in that area. There was a study done by one of the other developers, might be that 5-story one, but there's a significant need for the 3 bedrooms. There's just not that availability in that
We'll certainly
area,
take that into consideration.
And then the other just thing I want to caution everybody on in terms of walkscore.com, it's privately owned by Redfin. It is not data secure. It's an open source platform. Numbers are changing sometimes on a daily basis, and there's no tracking of that. It's it's what we have available essentially, but it's not a secure site. So I've seen it where numbers will change overnight and pretty dramatically. So that's just use it with a grain of salt.
Excellent, thank you. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
My comment, just wrapping up what several other folks have said, when I'm reviewing this case, I'm looking at the existing entitlement versus the proposal for the rezoning. And as it exists, you have a 3-story office building here as opposed to adding additional housing units. I think that certainly with the need for additional housing, specifically in this area with 3-bedroom apartments, but then also citywide, this seems like a better use of the parcel than a 3-story office building in this area, including to address the issues with respect to walkability that have been discussed here, and that it's flanked in the north and south with residential as well. So given that issue and the fact that the buffering would be scaled within the code to, depending on the amount of height that's actually used, I am in favor of this project. And with that, I'd like to make a motion to approve case Z9221 and to adopt the proposed consistency statement in the agenda materials dated April 26, 2022.
Thank you. Commissioner Miller has offered a motion to approve Z9221. And do we have a second?
Second.
Second. Second by Commissioner Lampman. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support? And any opposed? No, that motion passes unanimously. Okay, I'm going to do a time check really quick because I know we were going to start losing people. It's 11:59 right now. There are 3 additional cases on the agenda. Do we proactively put them on the May 10 agenda? Okay, apologies if you were waiting for those. But I will just very quickly, if we, so that's item Z322, Z422. The Dal Adams Drive issue. Give me 1 second. We would have to do the staff presentation and the applicant presentation. Okay. All right. If we can have folks stick around for another, it will take 20 minutes because we will have to start with the staff presentation. That is new business item rezoning Z322 on Dal Adams Drive.
All right, thanks. So this is a request to rezone just over an acre from residential 6 to residential mixed use 3 stories with zoning conditions, and your deadline for action is June 25th. The zoning in the area, as you see on this map, there is industrial mixed use zoning to the south. The site is contained in the Fuller Heights neighborhood, which has residential 6 zoning. And you can also see on the other side of Mooring Street to the southeast more residential 6 zoning. The industrial mixed use zoning to the south along Mercury Street, a lot of that is included in a pending rezoning request for what I believe is CX20, commercial mixed use 20-story with urban limited frontage and zoning conditions. So look at the aerial. So this is the site at the end of Dal Adams Street. It's the road ends at that location. You can see Dix Park to the north. This is Lake Wheeler Road here. And downtown is up in this direction. South Saunders Street and the commercial uses along it there. And you can see the industrial sites to the south. The Fuller Heights neighborhood comprises single-family detached housing, duplexes, and some a few examples of small apartment buildings. So what would look like a detached structure, but with more than 2 units. So there are several examples of that as well. This is the subject site. So there is one house there today. There's 2 lots. So this is one lot, and then there's another lot over there. So 2 lots, 1 existing structure. Zoning conditions prohibit these uses. This is the existing and proposed zoning. So right now, 9 townhouses could be built across those 2 lots. So again, there's one house there. There are 2 pieces of property at about an acre. The existing R6 zoning would produce 6 townhouse units. So under the requested 3-story mixed-use zoning district, we anticipate that a maximum of 44 units could be built there, and that would probably be 2 24 or 22 unit apartment buildings. That's kind of the geometry we laid out to make that estimate. So the site does currently have a lower walk and bike score than the city average, higher transit score. There's decent transit nearby. The site is very close to downtown Raleigh, so transportation costs are lower there, getting to those job opportunities. And regarding the walk and bike score, so there's an ongoing project for Lake Wheeler Road to redesign and construct a new streetscape there. Right now, Lake Wheeler Road is just 2 vehicle lanes in either direction. The plan and the design that's ongoing now will add sidewalks to both sides of the street and a bikeway on the Dix Park side of the street. So improving walkability and connectivity from the subject site and the neighborhood into downtown, into other areas nearby. Also improving the walk score likely, as we were just mentioning on the other cases. There are several developments in the area that are adding retail, dining, and other office establishments within walking distance of this property. So as the street gets rebuilt, and that's likely to be a public project, and these other private projects are bringing destinations to the area, walkability and bikeability are likely to increase. So this is the transit route. The property in question is right here. So Route 21 will take folks into downtown from the site. I believe it has 30-minute service. South Saunders Street is also served by a route that has 15-minute service. I don't have that on the slide, unfortunately. So no subsidized units here. Does add to housing supply. Does permit a variety of housing types that are less expensive comparatively to the detached housing type, which is the predominant building mode in the city. And what I would think about with this slide is there is one house there today. It is likely rented at a rate that would be considered naturally occurring affordable housing, so less expensive than other houses probably its size or nearby. But what the zoning allows today is for that house to be removed and the sites be developed with 9 townhouses. And what the request would allow is what we think is a maximum of 44 apartment units. So those 44 units individually would be likely less expensive than one of 9 townhouses built on that site. That's how this type of zoning improves affordability. It is not targeted for low-income households or moderate-income households that require subsidy to compete in the marketplace, but this does produce a less expensive housing type than the existing zoning would otherwise allow. And then, of course, because it has lower transportation costs, we're making improvements to bikeability and walkability. People who live there would likely spend less money on transportation, making it less expensive overall for those households. So demographic indicators, higher minority population compared to the city. There is also a higher level of education, and age is similar. The change in rents from 2015 were slightly less than the city average as well. So that has been stable more stable. 15% is still a lot, but adding more units will help to maintain that kind of consistent change in the market. So in terms of the land use history, so the property was annexed into the city in 1958, so before the Civil Rights Act and the Fair Housing Act. There are racially restrictive covenants from the original Fuller Heights subdivision that prohibited minority families from owning and renting properties there. So when the Civil Rights Act went through, those covenants were no longer legal. So minority families were legally allowed to buy and rent properties in the neighborhood. There was also, in the 1960s, Southside Urban Renewal Project, just on the other side of the neighborhood, that demolished a historically black community. And that is where the Martin Luther King's South Saunders Street, or excuse me, the McDowell and Dawson interchange is now. So there used to be a historically black community there, and it was removed in the 60s, and now there's some highway infrastructure. So I think the demographic indicators of the area that represent larger minority populations are several-fold. One, south and southeast Raleigh is historically where black families were legally allowed to live. There are pockets of areas where restrictive covenants prohibited that. And then I think also when the urban renewal project came through and demolished that historically black neighborhood, that there likely some of those residents found homes in the Fuller Heights neighborhood where they could recently legally attain housing. So just some history about what happened in the area. So the request is inconsistent with the low-scale residential flume designation. And also, the request is consistent with these policies by allowing for a more compact and variety of housing in an area that is high opportunity to jobs and parks and other recreational assets. So inconsistent with the future land use map. Your deadline for action is June 25th. And the approval would result in a amendment to the future land use map to moderate scale residential. I'll also say that the subject site and the broader area is part of an ongoing study, the Dix Edge area study, which we are in the final phases of getting the reports and amendments ready for Planning Commission City Council review. But the study did look very closely at affordable housing and has recommendations to increase the amount of subsidized affordable housing in the area. We have authorization from City Council to rezone some public-owned properties over by Eliza Pool Park that will, what we are hopeful is to produce at least 240 affordable housing units that would be targeted at 60% AMI or average around that. So that's ongoing. The other piece of the housing market analysis of the study suggests that there's also a missing gap of housing that is affordable to 100% AMI and above. And so increasing market rate housing in the community and really in the city overall will help to reduce pressure of higher income families outcompeting lower income families for lower priced units. So when we can add subsidized affordable housing units to the study area, which we're doing, and increase market rate housing, it reduces competition for the limited housing that's there, and it helps remove and reduce competition from higher income households outbidding lower income households for the lower priced units in the area. And that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take questions. I know the applicant and their representatives are here as well.
Thank you, Mr. Clem. Next, we will hear from the applicant and those in support. You have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, or good afternoon. Mac Paul here on behalf of Live Oak Assets. Becky Harper here with me this afternoon. Thank you very much for accommodating the public who's come here. I know it's sat through a lengthy meeting, and I know you all had planned to have a hard stop at noon, so I appreciate it. I'm going to be very brief. Essentially, Ms. Harper acquired this property, one of the two parcels, 8 years ago, the second one 2 years ago. It's about an acre, and this is simply about trying to anticipate future redevelopment to provide more housing in an area that's rapidly redeveloping for Dix Park and the growth of South Raleigh. It is overall consistent with the comprehensive plan. We acknowledge the future land use map issue. To the south right now is zoned industrial. There's a large zoning case underway that on the other side of Dow Adams would redevelop to much more intensity, and obviously the regional mixed use could go to 12 or 20 stories just to the south. So the staff report noted that the RX3 does have the Zone A, which makes it compatible. We're open to any concerns or specific direction you might have about if this needs to be more context sensitive than following the rules that are in the UDO. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. Next, we'll hear from members of the public, if you'd like to come up. Members of the public, those in opposition, have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. And I'm not trying to rush, especially if this is going to be an approval, but I did want the opportunity to speak today. My name is Vanessa Lucas. I live at 508 Ellis Court. I am in what is called Wheeler's Crossing portion of Fuller Heights. It was a development in the 90s by DHIC to provide affordable housing. The houses were all listed at about $60,000. Most recently, on Boylan Court, a house that has basically the same dimensions of mine, 1,140 square feet on a small lot, sold for $456,000. We are, I can't take you on a field trip, so I'm going to try and do this virtually. We're in a very unique position, I think, in isolation, as you see from the map, and I'm fine to use the future land use map. That helps me out a bit. So where I'm talking about, where you kind of see that horseshoe that's Talmadge Street with the courts off of it, that's where I live. And then as you kind of look at the neighborhood, you see by the way that we're surrounded, we basically have two exits. We can go out Lake Wheeler, and we can go out South Saunders. Now, South Saunders is unique in this area because at Grissom, which is the only way to get out of South Saunders from our neighborhood, there is a split onto South Saunders, what we like to call Little South Saunders, that is on one corner, the Harley-Davidson dealership, which frequently has activities that not only create traffic, but actually closes the exit to the street if we're going to exit out of South Saunders going into the direction downtown. And then on the other side is all commercial as well. There's Murray's Tire, which again creates traffic and parking. So in our little neighborhood, there are no sidewalks. There are two dead-end streets. There are the streets are heavily used for additional parking by residents and guests of residents. And it's not, as far as walking out of the neighborhood, at this point, not great. We're looking forward to what's going to happen on Lake Wheeler, but we do a lot of walking around our neighborhood. And like I said, no sidewalks, skinny streets, but people are out there walking their dogs, kids are playing. It's a very, very pleasant neighborhood. And looking at Deladam Street, where we're basically at the end of a dead-end street, right? So we're trying to add, Ms. Harper's trying to add up to 44 units at the end of a short, dead-end street that has parking on both sides and is narrow anyway. So it's going to cause huge traffic problems in an area that's already seeing a large influx of traffic problems. It's going to make it unsafe for residents in that area for walking and biking and walking the dog, for kids playing in the yard. Now there's been talk about expansion that would pull Deladams out to Mercury Street, which still only leaves the exit out of the neighborhood to Lake Wheeler, and also brings up the possibility of it being on a corner and then adding residential under the zoning that is requested here. The way that it is at this point with the ability to build 9 units is much more, basically could be at this point absorbed. But anything larger than that, I just can't see it being of any benefit to the neighborhood. Now, as far as affordability, this is a very obviously area that is highly desirable at this point. So in all deference to Mr. Klum's benefits about adding some units and that driving down costs everywhere, considering what land is going and the multiple requests to rezone in this area, I just don't see that as outweighing the damage it's going to do to our nice working class, diverse neighborhood. And we also already have, with the new 7.5 acres that are bumping up to Hamel, that's where Lake Wheeler and South Saunders come in. So our exit into downtown, the only way we're going to exit, is already going to come together, and there's going to be high rises, and that's going to create hundreds of units. So at this point, we do not think the neighborhood could take that. Again, it's inconsistent with the future land use map, and Mr. Klum talked a bit about the Dick's Edge study, which all of that is still coming together, but there has been significant input done, and the Dick's preferred use map keeps that site as low residential. And I just want to say, as far as input from the community, these planning commission meetings, it's very difficult. Not everyone in my neighborhood probably even, they get a letter, they don't know, but the value of the Dick's Edge study was that the scope of it and the input. And when you look at the community input, it was to keep this Deladam Street, where Ms. Harper is asking to rezone, to keep it as low residential. And like I said, Ms. Harper could already add 9 units there and certainly make, an excellent profit off of her investment. So I just ask that if you are considering approving this, that we wait to see what the Dick's Edge study comes out as, or allow the neighborhood more time where, I would make a commitment individually to get more input from my neighborhood. There has been, there's word on the street, and some of us have been, as we can, participating in the planning, like the lead up to this, and have made comments. But I have statements that I'd like to read from 2 of my neighbors with the remaining time. So I have a statement from Tiffany Lopez, and she lives at 504 Ellis Court. And Ms. Lopez says, members of the Planning Commission, thank you for hearing from myself and my neighbors on this rezoning case. I have mentioned in every meeting and in the planning portal that I think this level of zoning is inappropriate to the neighborhood size and infrastructure. We don't have sidewalks, we don't have adequate lighting, allowing up to 44 units on an acre of land at the end of a dead-end street seems like a terrible idea at best. This is going to cause congestion and noise on a level that is currently unknown to our quiet, working-class neighborhood. Future land use maps and Dick's Edge study recommendations all have this property remaining at the level of zoning it is now, which seems like a generous number of units. I know that Ms. Harper wants to maximize her profits, but I don't think her right to that should supersede the city's recommendations for this land. Thank you for your time and the opportunity, and I hope you will do what is right for our community. And then I also have a statement from Amy Riggleman, and she lives at 601 Sarver Court. Hello, She's Amy Schofield. My name is Amy Schofield. I have a couple of comments that I would like to share, but am unable to attend the hearing. Thank you for allowing Ms. Lucas a moment to share my comments. As a resident of the neighborhood, I am concerned about the potential rezoning of 1245 and 1251 Deladam Street, and I do not support the request. The proposed rezoning would allow for 44 units to be built on a property and will allow commercial business if the property is situated on a corner, which is a possibility in the future. The applicant has stated in the neighborhood meetings that they intend to develop the property into townhomes with residential use only. The current zoning already allows for this. I do not support a rezoning that would allow for commercial use or in excess of 15 units in that space. Any rezoning must take into account the increased traffic and parking needs in our neighborhood. We cannot add 44 apartment units with an expectation of street parking or without adding sidewalks for our children to safely wait at the bus stop. We cannot allow this rezoning to set a precedent in our neighborhood, as these commercial or higher density developments will quickly outgrow our neighborhood's infrastructure. If this rezoning is approved, it must include stipulations to require parking on the property, limit the number of units to less than 15, and not allow commercial use. Thank you for your time and consideration of my concerns.
Thank you for your comments. So I believe the applicant is still here and has heard the comments that were made from the public. Just given the time and the fact that I personally need to walk out of the room 23 minutes ago, I'm going to actually ask that we hold this and our discussion until our next meeting, because I do not want to direct changes in conditions now, because we're only allowed to do that at one time.
Be out of the country at your next meeting.
Okay. Would you like me to recommend holding it until the meeting after May 10?
What date is that?
The 24th?
It would have to be the 24th, yeah.
Okay. So without objection, we're going to hold this item, the Z322, to our May 24th meeting. Okay. And if we have nothing else for the good of the order, the remaining cases are going to move to our May 10 meeting, and we will approve the minutes at that time as well. Thank you.
Thank you.